After returning from a week-long international trip, I was pleasantly surprised when my mother-in-law, Linda, called me, sounding victorious. She mentioned something about a $30,000 windfall that we had apparently saved. Confused, I tried to recall any recent instance where I had amassed such a sum. As a freelance jewelry designer, I do maintain a savings account for unexpected expenses, but I certainly don't keep large amounts of cash around, and my bank card was securely with me. No one else has access to withdraw such a substantial amount from my account, I explained. He gave it to me, so I took it from the sideboard drawer. You guys are doing well, so it's fine, Linda declared over the phone, leaving me bewildered. Before I could understand more, she quickly thanked me and hinted at counting on me for future financial help before hanging up. I was left puzzled about the missing $30,000 until Kevin, my husband, returned home and cleared up the confusion. It was a misunderstanding. However, a month later, Linda bombarded me with numerous calls. I initially chose to ignore them, but the constant ringing eventually compelled me to answer. Over 60 missed calls displayed on my phone screen was disconcerting. As I picked up, Linda's shrill voice filled the room, accusing me of ignoring her. Her tone suggested she felt wronged, but to me it was merely the consequences of her assumptions. My life as Mary, a 35-year-old busy freelance jewelry designer wanting children but overwhelmed by work, is shared with my equally busy husband Kevin. He originally had a corporate job but now assists me in managing my growing design business. Early in our marriage, my designing gigs were sparse, and we largely depended on Kevin's steady income. Now, as my business flourishes, our roles and responsibilities have evolved, but so have our challenges, like dealing with unexpected family misunderstandings about money. As I neared the age of 33, my career as a jewelry designer began to flourish, necessitating better organization of my increasingly hectic schedule. Sensing the growing demands of my business, Kevin, who was well placed in his company and on track for promotion, made a bold decision. He resigned from his job to partner with me, applying his skills in management to our joint venture. Together, we secured contracts with prestigious international brands, enhancing both our professional and personal lives. However, managing success came with its unique set of challenges, particularly involving Kevin's mother, Linda. Living alone in the family home, she perceived our lives through a lens of luxury and often approached us with financial requests. "You always seem to be living so lavishly, I'm jealous," she would comment. As part of my role, attending product launches and dinners with executives was routine, yet Linda saw these obligations as mere leisure. Her requests grew more personal over time. My friend soon asked me for money to throw a party on one occasion. Although it might seem like we could easily afford such expenses, maintaining our business image was costly and filled with obligations that we couldn't ignore. We weren't living in luxury. These were necessary aspects of our work. Linda, draped in envy and often sarcasm, failed to grasp the nature of our expenses. Dressed up beautifully, eating at expensive places. "I envy you," she would say, despite my repeated refusals. Kevin, being her son, would occasionally acquiesce to her demands, reasoning that a little financial help was a small price for peace. "If giving her a little money keeps her quiet, then it's worth it," he'd argue, finding it simpler to appease her than to have our work disrupted. Yet Linda's demands only escalated. Recently, she expressed a desire for a new dress for an upcoming gathering. Just the other day, Linda came over and pestered Kevin. "Wouldn't a two-piece suit work?" "We've been asked to buy clothes before," I explained. She insisted there might be cheaper options, but what Linda wanted certainly wasn't cheap. Her rebuttal was that it was a fancy party and she couldn't be the only one dressed in old clothes. Furthermore, she insisted on a matching bag, leaving us exasperated. To manage her frequent requests, Kevin had previously set up a credit card in Linda's name, instructing her to use it for her expenses. Initially, she overspent significantly and was cautioned by Kevin. Although he asked her to inform us before making significant purchases, she continued her extravagant spending. This pattern of financial demands has left both Kevin and me at our wits' end, trying to balance the delicate act of supporting family while maintaining the integrity and sustainability of our business. I discovered an exquisite ring and couldn't resist purchasing it, though I regret not informing you beforehand. Unfortunately, the bill was exorbitant. If spending is going to be this unrestrained, perhaps it's best to return the card. We simply cannot cover these costs. The credit card was in Linda's name, but Kevin was the one managing and paying the bills. Linda seemed to misunderstand the purpose of the credit card, treating it as if it were an unlimited resource. She didn't grasp that every purchase made would eventually need to be paid for, and since the money wasn't coming directly from her own pocket, she continued to use it freely. Recognizing the need to curb her spending, Kevin decided to set a spending limit on her card. This led to Linda storming into her home one day, frustrated and complaining. "What the heck? I couldn't pay for my shopping the other day." We explained that your excessive spending was straining our finances, which necessitated lowering your monthly limit. Kevin replied calmly. "It's still enough, right?" he asked, trying to maintain some peace. "But you two are still dressing up, going to fancy places. How is what I'm doing any different?" Linda protested, viewing our activities as purely recreational. "That's part of our job, Linda. If that's a job, then what I'm doing isn't any different. It's unfair that only you two get to have all the fun," she argued. While it's true that our work involves attending product launches and parties in luxurious venues, these are professional obligations, not leisure activities. Despite her misconceptions, setting a spending limit on Linda's credit card seemed to have calmed the situation somewhat. Occasionally, Linda would visit and air her grievances to Kevin, but overall, life proceeded without major disruptions. As the end of the year approached, an exciting opportunity presented itself. A foreign brand manufacturer approached me with a proposal to expand our business dealings by relocating our base overseas. The prospect thrilled me, as it could potentially elevate me to the ranks of top-tier designers. Kevin, ever supportive as my manager, was all for taking the leap. "It's a chance we have to take," he affirmed. However, the prospect of moving abroad brought a new concern: Linda. Given her past behavior, it was a legitimate worry that she might insist on joining us overseas. The idea of living internationally was appealing, yet the thought of dealing with Linda's demands in a new country was daunting. When we shared our plans to move overseas for work with Linda that weekend, she responded exactly as we predicted. "I want to come too," she declared, assuming our move would be an endless vacation. Kevin tried to clarify, "We're going there for work. It won't be as leisurely as you think." But Linda was skeptical. "You're trying to trick me. You plan to live even more lavishly there without me watching," she accused. "We're not moving there permanently. We'll come back after our work is done," I explained, trying to ease her concerns. "Yes," she retorted, "you're saying that, but you're planning to leave me behind, aren't you?" Exhausted by this repetitive argument, both Kevin and I were weary. In an attempt to compromise, Kevin suggested, "Okay, we can't take you with us, but how about we pay for a week-long trip for you instead?" Linda perked up at this. "Really? Are you sure? We'll cover your flight and hotel, but you'll need to manage the rest," Kevin affirmed, pleased at least for the moment. However, the peace was short-lived. A few days later, while Kevin was preoccupied with the overseas move arrangements, Linda dropped by unexpectedly. "Hey Mary," Kevin said, "but I want to shop over there too. Can you give me some money?" she asked. "What about the card that Kevin gave you?" I inquired, knowing she had a designated credit card for such expenses. Linda's face fell. "That's the thing. Kevin finally took it away from me the other day," she admitted. It appears she had been reprimanded for overspending, and anticipating the challenges of managing finances with different currency rates overseas, Kevin had confiscated the card. "I don't have that kind of money on hand either," she added. "I can't give you money without Kevin's approval. Can you ask him?" I suggested, knowing full well Kevin's stance. "It's no use asking him, that's why I'm asking you," she pressed, raising her voice in frustration. Despite my suggestion, Linda ended up going on a 10-day trip abroad, which I assumed Kevin managed to fund somehow. Upon her return, she called me, burning with excitement. "I'm back, and it was so fun." She excitedly shared tales of her sightseeing and dining adventures. "Though I hadn't asked, and I overbought souvenirs. I could have fit them in my suitcase, so I had them shipped here. Can't wait for them to arrive," she exclaimed. "That's nice," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral despite feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Thanks to the money you saved up, I had a blast," she exclaimed. "Saved up money? What are you talking about?" I responded, puzzled and a bit alarmed, having no recollection of setting aside money for her splurge. "I found it in your house's sideboard drawer," she said, claiming she took $30,000. I was stunned. Why would such a large amount of cash be stashed away at home, especially not in a drawer where anyone could find it? Confused, I confronted her. "I'm not sure what money you're talking about, but taking it from our house without permission is theft, even if you're family. Do you understand that?" Linda's response was unsettlingly casual. That's why I'm telling you now. I used it. Consider it a post factum report, she declared unapologetically. I have no idea about this money, but if you took it and used it without telling anyone, that's a crime. And if it was something Kevin had set aside for an important transaction, it's even more serious, I explained, trying to make sense of the situation. Despite this, there hadn't been any noticeable disruptions in our business finances during her trip. You two live so extravagantly, so why can't I have a little of that? Think of it as doing a favor for your parent. It's not a big deal, right? She rationalized, showing a sense of entitlement that was hard to comprehend. It's one thing to ask for help from your son and his wife, but this is not how you should behave after taking someone else's money. I replied, still in disbelief. I'm glad you enjoyed your trip, but I'll have to discuss this with Kevin when he returns. Kevin will understand. After all, I'm his only mother and $30,000 isn't much to him, she assumed. All right, I'll pass the message along, I said, astounded by her lack of awareness. Later that evening, when Kevin came home, he looked troubled. Mary, do you know about the money I left in the drawer? He asked urgently. 15 days ago, I withdrew it from my bank account, and now it's gone. Keeping such a large sum in a drawer, didn't you think it was careless? He questioned. I needed cash immediately for an urgent payment. Do you know anything about it? It suddenly clicked. Linda's earlier call, thanking me for the $30,000 and mentioning how much fun she had, made sense now. It was Kevin's money, meant for a crucial purpose. Kevin, today Linda called, thanking us for the $30,000 and saying she had a blast with it. I didn't understand what she meant until now, I explained, piecing everything together. So, it was Kevin's money, but what was such a large amount meant for? I asked. Hey, if it wasn't for a business payment, we've been doing bank transfers for a long time, right? Why cash all of a sudden? I questioned, trying to understand the whole scenario while dealing with the ramifications of Linda's actions. I was aware it was Kevin's money that had disappeared, but the full context was still unclear to me. Linda, it turned out, had taken the money without informing us, and I needed to understand why. I asked Kevin, puzzled by the situation. Kevin began to unravel the backstory. After he had reduced the credit limit on Linda's card, she started secretly borrowing money from various sources, including consumer finance cards and credit cards she had opened without our knowledge. When Kevin discovered her growing debt, he took away all her cards and withdrew cash to settle her debts directly, aiming to bypass the banking system to keep our business accounts clean and maintain trust with our partners. This was also partly a farewell gesture, as we're moving abroad and won't be around to manage such issues for her, Kevin explained. I plan to handle her debts discreetly to prevent our financial records from getting complicated. A month had passed since then, and as I was busy packing for our move, Linda's frequent calls became hard to ignore. When I finally took her call, her voice was tinged with desperation. Why aren't you answering my calls? I've called so many times, she said, almost in tears. I'm sorry, Linda. I've been caught up with the move. What's going on? I asked, trying to remain calm and give her a chance to explain her side. It's not just one thing, it's everything. They're asking for payments almost every day. It's too much, Linda confessed, her voice cracking under the strain. Have you tried contacting Kevin about this? I inquired, hoping she had sought his help first. He seems to be blocking my calls. I can't get through to him at all, Mary. You're my only hope now. Please help me, she pleaded. I realized then just how complex the situation had become. Linda's financial recklessness had led her into a labyrinth of debt, and now, isolated from Kevin's assistance, she was turning to me as her last resort. As we prepared to start anew in a foreign country, the challenges of dealing with Linda's financial chaos loomed large, demanding immediate attention before we could fully focus on our new beginnings. I was taken aback by Kevin's drastic approach toward his own mother. If he had used the prepared funds to directly settle Linda's debts, this distressing situation might have been avoided. Instead, Linda was now overwhelmed with collections letters and relentless calls from finance companies and consumer lenders. It was a scene reminiscent of something from a dramatic film, one I had never expected to witness in real life. I'll talk to Kevin, but I can't guarantee what he'll do. A son should help his mother in trouble, right? Please ask him for me, Linda pleaded at the end of our conversation. However, with our impending business expansion and stretched financial resources, we couldn't afford to further assist Linda, especially given that she had misused the money meant to settle her debts. When I relayed the details of the call to Kevin upon his return home, he responded with a mixture of fatigue and resignation. I had planned to sort things out before we left, but she squandered that chance herself, he said coldly. Indeed, the money was originally earmarked to clear Linda's debts, but she had instead blown it on a lavish trip, leaving no room for excuses. As Linda's calls persisted, I followed Kevin's lead and set her number to block. Although part of me wished to help her, she was, after all, Kevin's mother. There was nothing I could do if he had chosen to detach from the situation. Meanwhile, the day of our move overseas was quickly approaching, and I still had a lot to pack. Amid the chaos of packing, I discovered another troubling piece of news. Linda had resorted to selling her house to manage her debts. It turned out she had concealed even more liabilities than we knew. The total amount was so substantial that even after selling her property, she couldn't cover it all. The thought of losing the family home where Kevin had grown up is profoundly upsetting. "Hey, our family home is gone. Are you okay with that?" I asked, sensing his sadness. "How can I be okay, but there's nothing we can do," Kevin replied, his voice tinged with sorrow. Losing the house where he grew up must have felt like a great loss, akin to how I felt when I lost my parents' house early in life. In the midst of these complex feelings and the heavy task of packing, we had to come to terms with the fact that some situations were beyond our control and focus on our future. As we prepared to start anew in a different country, the bittersweet reality of losing a family home struck me deeply. Watching Kevin navigate this loss was unlike anything I had experienced before. He had not only lost the tangible structure where his earliest memories were formed, but also his emotional sanctuary. All this while his mother, Linda, was still alive. It's an indescribable feeling, the mixture of loss and displacement, especially under such painful circumstances. I reflected. The impact was profound and complex, far more than mere bricks and mortar. It was about losing a part of one's history and the comfort of a place that no longer exists. Meanwhile, Linda, now residing in a modest apartment, faced the daily grind of managing her debts. Working part-time at her age posed significant challenges. Job opportunities for the elderly were limited, often physically demanding, and less rewarding. This stark new reality was a drastic shift from her previous life of unchecked spending and financial freedom. Though sympathy naturally arose seeing her struggle, it was tempered by the knowledge that her situation stemmed from her own financial imprudence. Life teaches us that actions have consequences, and Linda's case reaffirmed the harsh truth that financial responsibility is crucial at any age. Back in our new environment, our business was thriving beyond our initial expectations. The move overseas had catapulted our brand into the international spotlight, bringing in a flurry of inquiries and offers from various corners of the globe. Every new email and call held potential for expansion and collaboration, which was incredibly exciting yet immensely demanding. However, amidst the professional achievements, our personal lives bore the weight of relentless schedules. The dream of expanding our family seemed like a distant vision, something we hoped to circle back to when the waves of immediate demands subsided. Kevin, juggling multiple roles from logistics to client management, felt this strain acutely. As partners in both life and business, we found ourselves pondering the future and our priorities, wondering how we could align our professional goals with our personal desires. Looking out of our apartment window, taking in the view of the far cityscape with its neon lights blurring into the night, I reflected on the contrast between this vibrant, relentless city that was now our home and the quiet, steady life we had left behind. The complexity of our new life was exhilarating but also daunting, filled with endless tasks and decisions that challenged us at every turn. Navigating this new chapter, I often found myself reflecting on Linda's situation and the broader implications of our familial and financial decisions. It was a continuous learning curve, understanding how deeply intertwined our choices were with the fabric of our lives. Each decision, each sacrifice, and each success shaped not just our immediate circumstances but also the legacy we were building. As we embarked on this new phase of our life, we remained mindful of the delicate balance between achieving professional success and maintaining the relationships that defined who we were beyond our business achievements.
Please go to the police right now. What? Why are you saying that all of a sudden? For 20 years, I've been caring for my husband who has Alzheimer's. Today, we went to see our doctor for a checkup, and while Richard was being examined, the doctor came to me and said that. I was puzzled. Even if I was told to go to the police, I didn't understand why. Confused, I asked the doctor for a reason. Even if you tell me to go to the police, I don't know what my husband has done. Hearing my question, the doctor's expression clouded over. What could it be? Is it something that's difficult to say? Please don't be shocked. For the past 20 years, your husband has been. As the doctor slowly began to reveal the truth, I couldn't hide my surprise. I couldn't believe that Richard had been doing such a thing. Is that really true? When I asked again, the doctor silently nodded. I couldn't believe it. He had been doing such things without my knowledge. Overwhelmed, I quickly left the hospital and headed straight to the nearest police station. My name is Judy. I'm turning 80 this year. I've been married for 60 years to my husband, Richard, who worked in our local town. It all started when Richard turned 60. After he retired, he gradually began to show signs of dementia. Hey, do you know where my glasses went? Glasses? Huh? You're wearing them right now. What? Oh, right, I am. It's easy to forget something as common as wearing glasses. However, it wasn't just that. 6 months after Richard retired, he began saying things like, "Where is this place?" Where? It's our home, you and me. It's my first time here, but it feels cozy. Moreover, there were times when he suddenly got up at 3 a.m. and went outside. Was this dementia? Worried, I decided to take him to the hospital one day. These symptoms suggest his dementia is progressing. So, is there no treatment? While complete recovery is difficult, palliative treatments are possible. It's best to regularly adjust the approach based on periodic exams. I was shocked to hear the official diagnosis from the doctor. That Richard indeed had dementia. Eventually, he might even forget me. The thought made me incredibly anxious. Do you know who I am? What are you talking about? It's Judy, right? I know that much. Richard called my name with a laugh. I decided. There was no use in worrying. I would do everything I could for him. That's when I started caring for Richard. 5 years since the diagnosis, Richard gradually became more irritable. Your dinner is ready. Who are you? How did you get in here? What are you talking about? It's me, Judy. I don't know you. Get out. I don't want to eat food made by a stranger. Although he often hurled insults at me, a few minutes later, he would ask, Judy, is the dinner ready? Was this really dementia? Day by day, the symptoms worsened, and I was constantly being stressed. As time went by, we both turned 80. Perhaps it was time to consider a care facility. Richard wanders almost every night, and sometimes he can barely remember my name. I'm reaching my physical and mental limits with him. Listen, lately, I've been feeling really exhausted. You go out in the middle of the night, and I can't move as I used to. Maybe it's time to think about moving to a facility. What? Me, in a facility? Don't be ridiculous. Why should I have to go to a place like that? Richard became angry, and it was impossible to discuss further. I was saying this because I couldn't take care of him alone anymore. But without his consent, I couldn't place him in a facility. Doctor. I'm really exhausted, and I can't take care of him anymore. What should I do? As the symptoms showed no signs of improvement, I asked the doctor for advice while crying. I knew dementia could not be cured. I've been adjusting the medication doses and types according to your husband's symptoms. But it doesn't seem to be improving much. maybe consider a facility? That's the thing. When I brought up the idea of a facility, he got angry and refused. I see. Both the doctor and I were at a loss about how to resolve the situation. Eventually, I just had to endure and continue with the treatment. And I left the hospital feeling somewhat settled. That evening, after having dinner at home, I noticed an envelope on the desk. Had that envelope been there before? Curious, I asked my husband without looking inside. Hey, what's this envelope? Is it mail for me? Envelope. Oh. What's with the rush? I'm not rushing or anything. I had asked my husband casually, but he seemed quite flustered. I became curious about the contents as I reached for the envelope. And he loudly stopped me. Hey, that's mine. Don't look at it without permission. Give it here. Startled by his loud voice, I handed over the envelope to him unintentionally. Still, the envelope felt thick. I wondered what was inside. Please don't shout. Here, take it. After receiving the envelope from me, my husband hurried off to the bedroom, leaving a meaningful remark as he left the living room. I managed to cover it up. Huh? Cover up what? I didn't understand the true intention behind my husband's words. But he must be hiding something. Despite my lingering doubts, I was overcome with sleepiness and decided to go to bed that night. A month later, my husband still went out somewhere in the middle of the night. Each time I would wake up, but since he always returned home eventually, I recently stopped going out to look for him. However, I was concerned about his behavior on nights he went out. He would always end up buying large amounts of groceries at stores around noon. Where did the money come from since he retired? 3 days later, on the day of my husband's routine medical exam, the doctor said something shocking. Please go to the police right now. What? Why are you saying that all of a sudden? Even though I was told to go to the police, I didn't understand why. Confused, I asked the doctor for a reason. Even if you tell me to go to the police, I don't understand what you mean. Seeing my puzzled expression, the doctor's face clouded over. What could it be? Is it something that's difficult to say? Please don't be shocked. Actually, your husband has been pretending for the past 20 years. What? Earlier, during your husband's counseling session, he mentioned happily that he often goes out at night. When asked where he goes, he said his former workplace. If that's true, it's trespassing. It's best to consult with the police before it becomes a bigger issue. Oh, is that so? Well, considering his dementia, I can somewhat understand why he might go to his old workplace. About that, it's possible your husband doesn't actually have dementia. What do you mean? His responses are too clear for someone with dementia. There's been no change even after adjusting his medication. I've seen many patients, and some pretend to have dementia. Your husband seems to be one of them. I couldn't hide my shock as the doctor slowly revealed the truth. All this time, the symptoms were an act? He was pretending to have dementia and sneaking off to his old workplace at night? Could it be related to what was in that envelope? What's the likelihood he's been lying? While it's true that his cognitive function has declined somewhat due to age, I believe more than 80% of it is likely fabricated. I couldn't just sit by. If what the doctor said was true, my husband still had some time before his exams were done. I left him in the care of the doctor and immediately left the hospital to head to the nearest police station. Excuse me. I need some advice. What's the matter? Why such a rush? Is it an emergency? It's not exactly an emergency. It seems like my husband has been pretending to have dementia and sneaking into the factory at night. Really? Is that true? I don't want to believe it either, but the doctor mentioned there's a possibility that he's pretending to have dementia. Is that so? Understood. We'll increase our patrols accordingly. Could you please provide your phone number, address, and name? I filled in the information requested by the police and returned to the hospital. Richard had already finished his examination and was waiting in the waiting area. Sorry for being late. I had something to take care of. I'm tired of waiting. Let's go home. I was hoping nothing would happen, but that very night, Richard went out again. I assumed he probably went to his old workplace again while I waited at home. Then, an hour later, despite it being the middle of the night, our home phone rang. Could it be? Hello, yes, speaking. I'm sorry to call so late at night. We have arrested your husband for theft and trespassing. It appears he was stealing money from a safe. What? Trespassing I could somehow understand, but theft. He really did that. My worst fears had come true. The envelope he had hidden from me must have contained the stolen money. And he was using that money for his large purchases at the store. It all connected. We need you to come to the station. Could you come in? We'd like to discuss his usual behavior. Okay. I quickly got ready and hailed a taxi to the police station. After 20 years, to think he had been deceiving me like this. My anger towards Richard was overwhelming more than the sadness. Inside the police station, I was led to an interrogation room. Since earlier, he's been calling non-stop for you, and we can't get anywhere with him. Could you talk to him? We'll be listening nearby. Understood. Encouraged by the police, I sat down in the interrogation room. Across from me, Richard sat with a dejected expression. Do you recognize me? I don't know why I'm even here. Still continuing with that act. Enough is enough. I slammed my hand on the table and raised my voice at him. How long are you going to keep up this ridiculous act? I already know that your dementia is a lie. Dementia, a lie. You should know best that I have dementia, Judy. If it's not a lie, how come you suddenly remember my name now? After just saying you didn't know? Ah. He had clearly dug his own grave. Richard had a look of realization on his face. See. It was a lie, wasn't it? And the doctor mentioned it too, you know? He's seen many patients and said some pretend to have dementia. He was puzzled why changing your medication did nothing. Of course, there would be no change in symptoms if you never had dementia to begin with. As I pressed him, Richard fell silent. What do you have to say for yourself? You've wasted 20 years of my life. And this isn't the first time you've stolen from the factory, is it? So, why did you even pretend to have dementia? I thought, if I pretended to have dementia, I might get a lighter sentence if caught. I was astounded. Couldn't he have thought of a better excuse? I knew you've been sneaking into the factory at night to steal. We have no income, and you don't have that much allowance. To be buying all sorts of things in bulk at the store. And lying is pointless. Anyone at the factory could easily find out. Even so, Richard was to blame, but so was the factory. How could they not notice something was being stolen every time? What kind of management is that? It got tough after I quit my job. I just wanted a little money to enjoy myself. Finally, he admitted it. And to think I was deceived for 20 years. What a pitiful person I am. I should have restricted his activities much earlier. You deceived me well for 20 years. If you wanted money to enjoy yourself, you could have worked through a senior job program. You're right. I just thought it was okay to take a little because that company never managed their money properly. They were always off in their calculations. Seriously? You're ridiculous. There's no excuse for that. I'm going to divorce you. Wait, please, how am I supposed to live without your support from now on? I don't care about that. Do you realize you've stolen 20 years of my life? I should be asking for compensation. Well, if he resorted to theft because he had no money, it's clear he wouldn't have any money now. Richard seemed unable to say anything further. He just sat there, his face turned down, frozen. That's how it is. Reflect on your actions in prison, okay? I'll leave the rest to you. I told the police that and left the interrogation room. As I was leaving, I heard Richard's cries of distress, but I ignored them. A month later, the divorce was finalized, and I was enjoying a stress-free life at home for the first time in years. Then, I got a call from the police saying that Richard had been sentenced. Your husband, as you mentioned, was found to have committed multiple thefts previously. His imprisonment has been confirmed, so I wanted to inform you today. Is that so? Thank you for letting me know. Also, I have no relation to him anymore, so his sentence is of no concern to me. Oh, and please tell him to take care in prison. I hung up after saying that. Eventually, Richard was sentenced to 5 years in prison. After serving those years, he might never come out again. He could even die in prison. It's his own fault for deceiving people and repeatedly stealing for his own benefit. He deserves to stay in prison for life. After hanging up, I was thinking this about my ex-husband. A year later, I received a letter with Richard's name as the sender. A letter from him. What could it be? I had never received a letter from my ex-husband before. Curious about what was written, I sat on the living room sofa and began to read. I'm truly sorry for deceiving you, Judy. I know it's just a letter, but please allow me to apologize. Now, in prison, I work with people of all ages, from young to old like me. I've started forgetting various things. I wonder if this is what real dementia is like. When I'm released, could we live together again? I swear by all that is sacred, I will never deceive you again. After reading the letter, I tore it up and threw it in the trash. Live together again? He must be joking. The next day, I quickly rented a cheap apartment. I didn't want to live in a house where he might return. Fortunately, I had some savings, so I managed to rent a new place and moved immediately. Of course, I had no intention of telling my ex-husband about this. Surely, he would keep sending letters to an empty house. My time was also running out. I vowed to spend the rest of my life peacefully on my own. You will be moving into a facility, Emma said with a sly, unpleasant smile. I was taken aback by the sudden and unexpected statement. Just after my husband's funeral, with my grief far from healed, my son's wife calmly broke the news. Had I not only lost my husband, but was I also losing my home? My name is Susan, and I am 56 years old. I had just recently lost my husband, my companion of 30 years. We met at work and married when I was 26. A year later, our son Wayne was born. My husband was an ordinary office worker in the city, working from morning to evening on weekdays and enjoying golf on weekends. He was old-fashioned and never did household chores. But he was supportive in parenting, which I remember being grateful for. We were a typical family, sharing both happy and hard times, which I believe were happy times. From a young age, Wayne was active and spent his school years, from elementary to high school, immersed in soccer. He had a rough way of speaking during his adolescence, but he was fundamentally kind and considerate not to hurt others, and if he did, he was honest enough to reflect and apologize. It goes without saying that he was well liked by friends and adults alike. Every year, without fail, Wayne gave us birthday presents. It started with letters when he was in elementary school, and moved on to handkerchiefs and trinkets bought with his allowance as he went through middle and high school. In college, he treated us to a fancy dinner with money he saved from his part-time job. "You've worked hard and earned this money, you don't need to spend it on us. Spend it on your girlfriend," I would tease, to which he'd blush and respond, "What are you talking about? I don't have a girlfriend. The best thing for me is to make you and Dad happy," Wayne often said. My husband and I frequently talked about how proud we were of Wayne. However, things started to change with Wayne at some point. After getting a job and moving out, he began to contact us less, and his visits home also decreased. It seemed the reason was a woman he had started dating, Emma. They met after Wayne had started working, apparently at a mixer he was invited to by friends. About a year after they started dating, they got married. Emma had always had a haughty air about her from the first time I met her, and although she showed us respect as her in-laws on the surface, I could sense her looking down on us. Nevertheless, Wayne had chosen her, and we thought it was just youthful arrogance. So my husband and I watched over them with patience. With the marriage, Wayne became even less involved with us. It was lonely, but we laughed it off, saying that it was part of becoming an adult and we needed to let go. After Wayne became independent, the life of just the two of us initially felt lonely and lacking, but those feelings faded over time. 3 years later, a significant change came into our peaceful life. My husband was hospitalized with cancer. By the time it was discovered, it was nearly terminal, and the doctors said a cure was unlikely. There were times when home care was possible, but those were brief. My husband spent most of his time in the hospital. Wayne and Emma would say words of concern when they rarely visited, but it was clear they didn't mean them. When had Wayne become like this? Overwhelmed with this thought, I spent my days grieving alone at home, as I couldn't burden my increasingly weak husband with my sorrows. To add to my grief, my husband's condition worsened, and he passed away 6 months after his hospitalization. The only reason I wasn't completely lost to grief was the busyness of preparing for his funeral. Wayne didn't come to help, my sister had to step in. With her help, amidst the chaos of finding funeral homes and contacting attendees, we managed to see the funeral through. At the funeral, many who loved my husband and our relatives gathered, creating a consistently pleasant atmosphere. As it ended and I looked around the chapel, I noticed Wayne and Emma were missing. None of my relatives or sister knew their whereabouts. A bad feeling growing inside me, I finished cleaning up and headed home. As I approached the house, I noticed lights on. I thought it odd, but assumed Wayne had returned home first. Relieved, I entered through the front door. As I stepped into the living room, I saw unfamiliar cardboard boxes piled on the floor. Wayne and Emma were busily packing and unpacking things into the boxes. The funeral had started in the afternoon, and it was now past 9 p.m. What were they doing at this late hour? And what were all these boxes? I approached them with suspicion. It seemed that they noticed I had returned. "Ah, Mom, welcome back," Wayne said brusquely, without even looking at me. "Mother, welcome back. You must be tired from the funeral," Emma said, pausing her frantic packing to greet me. "Yes, I'm home," I replied, bewildered, but then I noticed something odd. The items Wayne and Emma were packing into boxes were my clothes and everyday items. Confused, I asked, "Why are you packing my things?" Emma replied as if it were obvious, "Because you're moving, of course. Thanks to you being away for the wake and the funeral for 2 days. We've made good progress with the packing." "What do you mean I'm moving?" I was confused and struggling to keep up with the sudden turn of events. But Wayne started to explain. "Now that Dad's gone, this house belongs to me, right? Dad said that we would inherit the house as his estate, and the $50,000 in cash would be split half and half between you and me. As per Dad's wishes, from today, Emma and I will live here," Wayne stated firmly, without a hint of hesitation. "That's why you need to leave today. You will be moving into a facility," Emma said with a sneering smile plastered on her face, contrasting with Wayne's serious expression. "Sure, Dad said that, but it was just a verbal promise, not an official will, right?" I asked, flustered. "A promise is a will, isn't it? In fact, we should have inherited all the cash too. This house isn't worth much anyway, it's so run down. Dad's hospitalization unnecessarily dragged on, so the savings must have dwindled too." Wayne's words filled me with despair. That my kind-hearted Wayne could say such cruel things was a reality too harsh to accept, and my mind went blank. Emma continued relentlessly. "Right, it would have been better if he'd just dropped dead. Why not just sell this house? That would probably please my father-in-law, right?" I felt fear towards Emma, who could say such cruel things to her own family by marriage. Marrying this woman had turned Wayne into a stranger. My sadness and despair slowly turned into anger. "Stop it. There are things you shouldn't say. Wayne, you adored your father. What's with this attitude? Have you forgotten the gratitude for being raised?" I appealed to Wayne, clinging to my last hope. "Huh? Mom, what are you talking about? Sure, I'm grateful like anyone else. But he's dead, isn't he? There's no benefit to me from thanking a dead person. Anyway, this house is mine, so please leave," Wayne said coldly, shocking me even as my anger began to fade. "That's the situation, so please take your belongings and leave soon." "This is our house," Emma said sarcastically. However, her words just passed through me unheard. By then, I had made up my mind. I would no longer consider Wayne my son, and I would make them regret this. "Please, do as you like." With those words, I left my home. It was already past 10 p.m. Although it was late, I decided to stay at my sister's house that night. When I explained the situation to her, she was even more outraged than I was, and it was hard to calm her down. I was calm enough to find her agitation amusing. Being this composed was possible because I had an ace up my sleeve. I was going to be busy starting tomorrow. With that thought, I was able to sleep well for the first time in a long while. The next day, my phone rang. As expected, it was Wayne. The timing was so predictable that I laughed to myself. "Did the lawyer contact you?" I asked him as soon as he answered. "Mom, how did you know?" But more importantly, the lawyer said this house isn't mine. What's going on? Didn't Dad say he was leaving it to me? Was it all a lie? Wayne rambled on in a near-panic state. To such a Wayne, I responded in a gentle tone, as if soothing a child. It's not a lie. Dad did intend to leave the house to you. Until that time. Stunned by my reply, Wayne fell silent for a moment. That time? He asked weakly. Let's discuss the details with the lawyer involved. I'm heading over there now. With that, I ended the call abruptly. Hours later, Wayne, who insisted the house was his, and I were seated across from each other in the living room, along with Emma and the lawyer. Emma was the first to speak. What do you mean this house isn't Wayne's? Her usual confident and condescending demeanor had faded, replaced by a mix of panic and anger as she confronted the lawyer. Please explain to them, I urged the lawyer. Understood. First, Wayne. How did you come to believe that this house was your property? The lawyer began the inquiry, and Wayne replied. Dad said before he died that the house would go to me, his son, and the savings would be divided between me and Mom. The lawyer continued calmly after hearing Wayne's response. It may be true that your father said that, but was it formalized in a will? Sweat dripped from Wayne's forehead. That doesn't matter. It's a fact that Dad said he would leave the house to me. Wayne retorted desperately, his eyes darting around. If there was no will, then the inheritance would be divided according to legal standards. This is called statutory inheritance. In cases like this, the estate would be divided half and half between the spouse and child. That is, between Susan and Wayne. The lawyer paused for a moment before continuing. However, if the deceased had left a will, the contents of the will take precedence. 3 months ago, I was asked by Wayne's father to draft a will. I am here today to explain the contents of that will. Wayne and Emma audibly swallowed their fear. To conclude, regarding the division of the assets, the house, savings, and all other properties are to be inherited by the spouse, Susan. Emma, shaking, screamed in anger. We weren't told that we wouldn't receive the house or money. I don't care about any will. Isn't this tyranny? Wayne, say something. However, Wayne seemed to have no energy left to complain. In a weak voice, he asked me, Mom, what did you mean by that time you mentioned on the phone yesterday? I explained to Wayne about that time when his father decided to create the will. 4 months ago, Wayne and Emma had unusually come to visit him in the hospital. There was a moment when my husband had to leave the room for tests, leaving Wayne and Emma alone in the room. As my husband was about to re-enter the room after the tests, he overheard their conversation from outside. Your father will be gone in a few months, right? Then the house will be ours, Emma had asked. Yeah, I wish Dad would just die quickly instead of wasting time on useless treatments. If we can sell the house for a good price, let's just get rid of it. They laughed heartlessly. My husband was devastated by his beloved son's cruel words. After days of anguish, he disclosed to me that he decided to leave all his assets to me. Yet, until the end, he wanted to believe in Wayne. He hoped Wayne would repent and told me so until his dying day. I had felt the same. If Wayne changed, I was willing to leave the house to him as originally planned. But after the funeral, seeing Wayne and Emma's ruthless behavior, I decided to harden my heart. You threw away your last chance. I had hoped you would change your heart. But apparently, it was impossible. Wayne, when did you become such a person? And why did you choose such a person as a spouse? Today, I end my relationship with you as family with my declaration Wayne looked utterly defeated and said nothing, just hung his head. I thought getting the inheritance would free us from a life of debt. Emma frustratedly ruffled her hair. You have debts? Since it was the first time I heard that they were in debt, I voiced my surprise. Yes, Wayne loves gambling, and I kept buying clothes and bags. Never having enough money. Plus, Wayne borrowed from loan sharks. So we can't keep up with the repayments. You're his mother, you should help us. Now, Emma started asking me for help. She had succumbed to her own desires, neglected her family, and only thought of herself. The consequences had come back to haunt her. No matter what she said now, I had no obligation to help them. At this moment, the doorbell rang, and when I answered, it was Emma's father. Why are you here? Emma was speechless at her father's sudden appearance. And Wayne looked just as shocked. I heard about everything from Susan and came right away. Emma, what kind of person are you? To speak so rudely to someone who has taken care of you and to think only of money. I'm ashamed as a parent. I'll cover Wayne and Emma's debts. Emma and Wayne were excited by the mention of taking over the debt. But Emma's father sharply clarified, don't get it wrong. It's just taking over. You'll repay the full amount. Wayne and Emma will come with me. I've decided they'll work at my company. No backtalk. Emma's father runs a local company and has rapidly expanded it with his authoritarian management style. By making them work under him, he planned to have them repay their debts and straighten out their attitudes. Emma's father took his daughter and Wayne away like a whirlwind. Later, Emma's father updated me by phone about their situation. They were working in particularly busy departments of the company, being chased by work every day and diligently paying off their debts. Their finances were strictly controlled by Emma's parents, almost like monks. In such a harsh environment, I hoped they would reflect and become more considerate of others. Though I would no longer be involved with them, I wished them well from afar. I have since returned to my home and am living peacefully. Naturally, I feel the loneliness without my husband. But as I increase my interactions with friends, I find the fun times growing more than before. I cherish my daily life, planning to enjoy the rest of my life in this house filled with memories of my husband. It's embarrassing that our eldest only finished high school, while the younger one achieved so much. The voice that demeaned me belonged to my mother at our family home. My father nodded along, and my brother, caught in the middle, beamed proudly knowing he was being praised. My brother went to a prestigious university, while I started working after graduating high school. My parents always praised my brother, calling him an elite who had made efforts. Why did such a gap form between us? I am Nicole, a 26-year-old web designer, born in a somewhat rural town. I lived with my grandparents, parents, and younger brother, Sean. Sean was the long-awaited boy, born 7 years after me, and naturally, our parents adored him. They always prioritized his needs and whims over mine, often leaving me feeling neglected. Moreover, our parents never treated us equally. For Sean's birthday, they'd give him big toys as gifts, but since my birthday was close to Christmas, I'd get just one gift combined for both occasions. Usually something educational like study tools. When Sean started playing soccer as a club activity, our parents attended every practice and game to support him. I was in the tennis club during middle school, but even at my final match before retiring, neither parent came because they had to drive Sean around. There were days I felt like crying, but Sean comforted me. He even said to our parents, "That's not true. Nicole is smarter and she even teaches me. She is really amazing." And a few days after my last match, he made me a small bouquet from flowers he picked in the park, showing his gentle nature. Our grandparents also found our parents' favoritism excessive and often reprimanded them, but by the time I graduated high school, both had passed away one after the other. Sean always stood up for me, but especially our mother didn't find it amusing. She grew strict with him, threatening, "If you keep siding with your sister, I'll make you stand outside." Especially as winter began and snow started falling. I didn't want my much younger brother to suffer, so all I could say was, "You don't have to worry about me anymore." Eventually, Sean stopped defending me, and under our parents' protection, he enjoyed his days filled with sports and studies. After our grandparents' consecutive funerals, my parents simply refused to let me go to university due to a lack of savings. I had wanted to study design, but that was not allowed, and I had to find a job immediately after high school. However, as a final act of defiance, I left our hometown for an office job at a design firm that handled websites for beauty salons and nail shops. Although it was a small company, I couldn't give up on my dream and managed to get a position as a designer's assistant. While doing office work, I observed the professional designers daily. The harsh reality was difficult, but it only motivated me more to become a web designer myself. My alone time for study became precious. I minimized visits home because whenever I did, my parents would mock me. So I stayed away and spent weekends studying design and enhancing my software skills through online courses. This effort was recognized at work, and one day, I was integrated into the design team. My dedication was well known among the designers, who introduced me to useful materials and connections. By the third year, I had grown enough to be trusted with jobs as a web designer. 8 years after high school, as I became accustomed to my job as a web designer, news of Sean's college entrance exams arrived. He aimed for a famous private university in the city, aspiring to enter its medical school. Thanks to his diligent studies, his success was almost guaranteed. Recalling our childhood, I wanted to support him if possible and told him so. A few months later, Sean passed and got into the famous medical university. I congratulated him warmly. "Sean, I'm truly happy for you. I heard how hard you worked, attending tutorials daily." Sean thanked me modestly, but then I received a particular request. Actually, the private medical school requires a donation. It's optional, but Dad and Mom say we'd be looked down upon if we didn't contribute because we're from the countryside. It's better to pay, right? But you know our family's just scraping by with my tuition and living expenses for college. Sean said he would earn some of his living expenses through part-time jobs, but I knew the immense study load waiting for him in medical school would make that difficult. I wanted to contribute, but with our father being a regular employee and our mother working only twice a week, it was a stretch. The tuition for a private medical university was hard enough. They probably counted on using my savings, which they should have just stated outright. Despite deepening my disdain for our parents, I readily agreed to his request and helped with the donation and related expenses for his entrance. Thus, Sean moved to an apartment close to his university, and his new life began. The place where Sean lived wasn't far from my house, so he could rely on me anytime. Maybe he was enjoying his university life too much. as his replies to me were always curt. Yet he would contact me asking for things like, "I want to eat this," or "I need this, please send it." So I found myself sending parcels or lending money. Doing financial favors our parents couldn't. We occasionally went out to eat as siblings, but even then, Sean was unresponsive, ignoring me and fiddling with his smartphone, except during meals. Whatever I asked, the only response was, "I'm busy with my studies." His indifferent reactions left me increasingly perplexed. At some point, he began to treat me coldly. Even today's dinner felt like I was forcing him to join me. To lighten the mood, I brought up our home in a deliberately cheerful tone. "Well, I guess Mom and Dad are just happy seeing you doing well." Suddenly, Sean looked at me sharply and distorted his face as if to scoff through his nose. "Of course. I'm at a famous medical university. And you are just a high school grad designer, right? They aren't worried about you at all. You have a job that doesn't even need qualifications." His harsh words made me feel the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean by no qualifications?" "Just what it sounds like, a web designer, right? Nowadays, anyone can do that with a little search on the internet. Some of my classmates can even create websites. Aren't you embarrassed by such a job? Maybe you should study a bit and get some qualifications. Though that might be tough with just a high school brain." "Sean, what's gotten into you?" "I study seriously for my job. Don't mock me without knowing anything." Sean glared at me irritably and grimaced. "Dad and Mom say it every day on the phone. They say it's great how the eldest son got into medical school. But it's embarrassing that their older daughter only finished high school. I'm contacting you and going out to eat with you because they asked me to. Just so the embarrassing sister won't feel too inferior. The future renowned doctor has to take care of you, they say." My parents have always compared me to Sean. He was smart and kind. A reliable brother, but they would directly say to me, "Nicole, you're stupid and slow, and you're not thoughtful." Those memories flash back, making it difficult for me to breathe. Dizziness struck me from the shock, and I lowered my head to endure it. Yet, thinking I was crying, Sean just chuckled lightly and said, "I'm leaving now," then stood up and left. Having gained the freedom of college life, Sean had changed completely. Surrounded by geniuses that he never had back home probably affirmed the praise he received from our parents. Daily hearing from them that Sean is a real genius. And he will definitely become a great doctor, it's no wonder he believed it all. They included plenty of derogatory remarks about me in those praises, which influenced Sean too. Around Christmas, as usual, I went back home for a visit. I was told to bring Sean, who still maintained his attitude of ignoring me. This was his first visit back since he started studying and practicing intensely. Perhaps that's why, as soon as we arrived, my parents clung to him and ignored me. Home was ready with luxurious dishes waiting for Sean, and at night, a big party was held with neighbors, relatives, and Sean's former classmates who remained in the area. Caught up in the atmosphere, Sean began loudly bragging to everyone around. "Mom keeps saying to come back home. But I'm studying at that famous private university, what's more, in the medical faculty. It's understandable I can't come back often. Plus, studying at the medical faculty isn't something I can do alone. We need to work in teams, so if I'm the only one to return home, it puts everyone else in a tough spot. Everyone comes to me with their questions, so give me a break." I was in the kitchen, pretending to prepare dishes. But I could hear Sean's loud brags clearly. though our parents and relatives, who had always lavishly praised Sean, might ignore it. The neighbors and former classmates probably didn't appreciate his boastful talk. Perhaps tired of his grandstanding? A man in my neighborhood brought up a conversation, maybe thinking to do me a favor. By the way, Nicole is also working hard, isn't she? In design, I believe. But Sean and our parents unanimously and flatly denied it. No way, Nicole is hopeless. She seems to be trying, but... That's right, our eldest is just a high school grad, which is quite embarrassing. There's a big gap between her and Sean. In a room filled with former classmates and neighbors with high school diplomas. It's surprising how Nicole can still come home. Laughing loudly, Sean continued as both our parents chuckled. I was just frozen, feeling a rush of anger rising the next moment. Good for you, Nicole. From next year, you won't have to show your face here anymore. Understood. I managed to say, my voice trembling. Despite the apologetic faces of the onlookers. If you say so, I'll take you up on that. I'm never coming back here again. The anger inside me bubbled like magma, but the words that came out were utterly cold. Don't ever show your face here again. On the way to the station, I nearly screamed, holding back the overwhelming emotions. My parents had, at least to some extent, worked and raised 2 children. If I valued my career, I couldn't maintain such relationships. Several months after my decision, just as the new academic year was about to begin. Hey, what's happening with my tuition fees? Sean's voice was tentative, tinged with panic. I responded calmly. I supported last year's. The entrance fee, donation, and first year's tuition, remember? That's not it. I mean for the second year. This year's fees, they're urging me from the university to pay soon. What's going on? What do you mean, what's going on? I never said I'd pay. I could tell Sean was speechless on the other end. Actually, I was only supposed to pay for the donation, right? That can't be. But you know, my living expenses. My ability to save significantly stemmed from switching to a major design firm. Having informed my family about my job change. Days later, I also refused further contact with my parents. Sean's calls became daily, filled with whining. If there had been a sincere apology. Among the messages, there were astonishing ones. People who look down on others shouldn't become doctors. With this, I cut off all contact with my family and welcomed a new season. I had been supporting not only my brother's tuition but also sending money home. Although my brother was talented, he had squandered any substantial money. One day, perhaps stressed, my father caused an incident. On the bus during his commute. My mother tried to work, but with only limited part-time experience. My parents attempted to contact me through relatives. But the content they wanted mediated was invariably demanding and authoritative in tone. The relatives recognized that the problem lay with my parents. And gradually they asked me not to worry about it. And ceased communicating on their behalf. This led to a thinning of ties with my family, allowing me to return to a peaceful life. According to the relatives, bad rumors were circulating about my brother, who had become a recluse, and my unemployed father, whose unsavory appearance further alienated them. Unable to bear the situation, my mother eventually disappeared from view and now, I'm told, is uncontactable. Left behind, they survive meagerly on welfare, without any income. Warm interactions with neighbors might have offered some solace. But given their behavior, it's unlikely they receive much sympathy from those around them. As for me, my career in design is progressing well. I have secured participation in significant projects that will prominently feature my name. Using this as a stepping stone, I've launched a long-held plan, that is, preparing for university entrance exams. As funds accumulate smoothly and my current work stabilizes, I plan to begin this new challenge. I'm also considering setting up my own business, wanting to learn not only about design but also about management. I'm excited about these new ventures.
My name is Erin Bradshaw, and I recently discovered that my parents embezzled my $120,000 MBA fund to help my sister Monica and her fiancé Gregory buy a house. The betrayal cuts so deep that I'm still struggling to process it. My chest tightens every time I think about what they've done. And the whole situation feels like a nightmare I can't wake up from. Let me walk you through how this painful journey began. My grandparents, Howard and Edith Bradshaw, were incredibly wealthy and placed enormous value on education. They embodied the finest traditional values: hard work, financial prudence, and long-term investing. I didn't see them often since they lived across the country. But whenever we connected, I could feel their genuine concern for my future. Grandma Edith, a former math teacher herself, seemed to recognize something in me that my parents never did. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you. My grandmother would tell me with such conviction in her voice, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. The bitter irony of those words now makes my stomach churn. Grandpa Howard passed away 3 years ago after a brief illness. Though devastating, we still had Grandma Edith, our family's emotional cornerstone. She never missed acknowledging birthdays and achievements, always sending thoughtful cards and care packages filled with little treasures. Then last year, we lost her too. And it created a big hole in my heart that hasn't really mended. The day she died, I sat cross-legged on my apartment floor, surrounded by every letter she'd ever sent me, tears streaming down my face as I traced her handwriting with my fingers. Each envelope contained life wisdom, and usually included a modest check for your education fund. I had no idea then that she and Grandpa had been building something much bigger for my future all along. When the lawyer went over the will in that fancy conference room, the way everything was divided seemed pretty fair. I could feel the chill of the big mahogany table under my hands as I took in what was being said. My parents, Richard and Diane Bradshaw, received substantial savings and the family home. Monica inherited family heirlooms and all of Grandma's jewelry, easily worth tens of thousands of dollars. To me, they bequeathed a significant education fund specifically earmarked for my MBA studies. This fund is to be used exclusively for Erin's education, the attorney emphasized, his glasses catching the light as he looked directly at my parents. Richard and Diane, you've been appointed to manage these assets until Erin requires them for her studies. I remember feeling a rush of gratitude that my grandparents had considered my future so carefully. Since I was already employed at a successful tech company, the gift seemed perfectly aligned with my career aspirations. Not once did I suspect my parents would violate that trust. Looking back, my heart sinks thinking about how I should have recognized the warning signs. Monica has always been our family's golden child from my earliest memories. I hate to sound bitter, but the truth burns inside me every day. She was clearly the child my parents cherished most. In their eyes, everything she did was remarkable. She was exceptionally talented, hardworking, and special. I can still vividly recall my high school graduation day. The weight of my valedictorian medal felt heavy against my chest. After winning a prestigious national science competition and earning a full scholarship to Stanford, my hands trembled slightly as I approached the podium to deliver my speech. When I looked out at the audience, searching for my parents' proud faces, my heart sank. There they were, heads bent over their phones, barely even aware I was speaking. That same night, Monica, who had already dropped out of college twice, casually mentioned. She was thinking about becoming a teacher. You would be amazing with children, my parents exclaimed, their faces lighting up with a joy I rarely saw directed at me. That's absolutely perfect for you. My accomplishments that day? A hurried, good job, Aaron, and a quick pat on the shoulder. This pattern continued throughout my life, a constant ache I carried silently. After graduating with honors in computer science and working relentlessly, I secured a position at a prestigious tech company in Silicon Valley. Over the past 6 years, I've climbed the corporate ladder, earning respect from both my superiors and team members. Now, as a senior project manager, I lead a team of 15 talented professionals and manage accounts worth millions of dollars. But to my parents, I was always just the sensible one, the daughter who succeeded. Because you were naturally smart. The dismissive tone in their voices made my accomplishments feel hollow, no matter how hard I worked. Meanwhile, Monica bounced between jobs before settling as a teacher. Gregory works as the head zookeeper at our local zoo. And she's now the principal at a small private kindergarten. I don't have anything against them personally, they're decent people. But while they seem content in their careers, their combined income is modest at best. A fact that never seemed to concern my parents. For the past year, Monica and Gregory have dominated every family gathering with talk about buying a house. Each Sunday brunch at my parents' home became an exhausting debate about real estate prices and how they were just throwing money away on rent. My sister would spread glossy photos of luxury homes across the dining table, far beyond anything they could realistically afford, while they complained about the unfairness of the housing market. Despite being in their mid-30s, my parents still treated them like struggling young people who need help. I'd watch my father's emphatic nodding as he'd say, "You absolutely deserve a beautiful home," while my mother would add, "It's just so difficult for young people these days." The knot in my stomach would tighten as I sat silently, wondering why my MBA aspirations never received such enthusiastic support. About a month ago, I began working on my MBA program applications. This wasn't a sudden decision, I'd been meticulously planning this career move for years. I spent countless nights researching programs, strategically developing my professional experience, and maintaining an impeccable work record, all while paying off my student loans. My goal was clear, I wanted to enroll in a prestigious program that would propel me into executive leadership at my current company. Every C-level executive there holds an MBA from a top university, and I was determined to follow the same path. One evening, I visited my parents with a portfolio of application materials under my arm. Since application fees alone for elite MBA programs can run into thousands of dollars, I needed to confirm exactly how much was available in the education fund. The spreadsheets and budget calculations I'd prepared felt reassuring in my hands as I brought up the subject. Looking back, their reaction should have been my first serious red flag. "Don't worry about that right now," my father mumbled, shifting uncomfortably in his plush leather chair, his eyes darting away from mine. My mother quickly jumped in, her voice unnaturally high. "Just focus on your applications for now. We can discuss the details when necessary." Then they abruptly changed the subject to Monica and Gregory's house hunting progress. My heart raced as I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. Initially, I tried to dismiss my concerns, thinking perhaps they were just disorganized with the paperwork. But something felt deeply wrong, like a cold shadow creeping across my future plans. A week later, I brought it up again, more directly this time. With my application deadlines approaching, I explained that I needed to know if the funds were available because I needed to budget for applications to multiple prestigious schools. That's when they dropped the bomb that shattered my world. "We used your MBA money for Monica," my mother announced, in the most casual tone imaginable, as if commenting on the weather. "She's buying a house with Gregory." I looked at her in disbelief, thinking I must have misheard. The portfolio resting on my knees suddenly felt really heavy. My father leaned forward, his face hardening. "Monica needed it right now," he declared. Besides, it wouldn't be fair for you to get a free ride. When Monica struggled with student loans. When I asked my mother to repeat herself, something inside me snapped. Years of repressed frustration came pouring out in a flood of emotion I couldn't control. My voice shook as I demanded to know how they could hurt me like this. How they could embezzle funds my grandparents had explicitly set aside for my education. I reminded them that the will had been crystal clear about how that money was to be used. What you've done is illegal, I said, my hands trembling with anger. My mother rolled her eyes dismissively, as if I were being dramatic. You'll figure something out, she said with a shrug. It's not like you can't take out loans like everyone else. The casual way they dismissed both my future and my grandparents' wishes felt like a physical blow. They acted as if they'd done nothing wrong, as if my education, my career plans, and my grandparents' last wishes were completely insignificant. When I mentioned taking legal action, their response cut deeper than I could have imagined. They laughed. Not just chuckled, they actually laughed out loud. The sound echoing off the walls of their expensive living room. With what money? My father asked, looking me straight in the eye. With a smirk that made my blood run cold. You can't even afford a lawyer. My mother added with a dismissive wave, don't be ridiculous, Aaron. This is a family matter. The humiliation I felt in that moment is impossible to describe. I stood there, frozen in shock, as the truth hit me like a tidal wave. They had always seen me as an afterthought, someone whose future they could sacrifice to help Monica. My financial independence, my successful career, my academic achievements, none of it mattered to them. In their eyes, I would always be second best. That night, sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned, my mind racing, with thoughts of how my grandparents had trusted my parents to do the right thing. They never knew the reality of my family dynamics because I never thought it was worth sharing. I never told anyone how I was treated. I kept asking myself, was it really unfair treatment? They weren't abusive, they just loved Monica more. That realization made my heart ache. Almost like I was feeling it physically. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, the lack of sleep burning behind my eyes. I requested a private meeting with my boss, Philip Lawrence. He's been more than just an employer since I joined the company. He's been a true mentor. Philip has consistently encouraged my professional growth and witnessed my progression from a junior position to team leader. More importantly, he has extensive experience in corporate law and maintains connections with top legal firms. As I sat in his glass-walled office, the early morning light streaming in, I felt a strange calm replacing my anxiety. This isn't just about money, Philip reassured me, his face serious. This is about holding your parents accountable and honoring your grandparents' wishes. I also plan to contact my father's cousin, Uncle Warren Harris. He's a successful venture capitalist who always seemed to see through my parents' favoritism. Although he wasn't around much during my childhood, he consistently showed genuine interest in my achievements and aspirations. Plus, he's the only family member with more influence and success than my parents, something that suddenly felt very important. Something fundamental shifted inside me when my parents laughed in my face. Though I've always been the quiet one, the sensible daughter who never caused problems, they assumed I had no power, no resources, no backbone. They're about to discover that the daughter they've consistently underestimated is far more formidable than they ever imagined. It's been 2 weeks since my last post, and the situation has evolved at a breathtaking pace. The events unfolded much faster than I anticipated, with each day bringing new revelations that leave me both vindicated and stunned. After my meeting with Philip Lawrence, he didn't just offer his support, he immediately connected me with his contact at Wilson & Partners, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. I remember sitting in their sleek conference room, my hands clutching my portfolio of evidence as Philip reminded me. This isn't just about recovering money, Aaron. It's about holding your parents accountable and honoring your grandparents' wishes. Meeting with the attorneys was eye-opening. Their confident assessment confirmed What I already knew in my heart, my parents had clearly violated both the terms of the will and their fiduciary responsibilities. My stomach dropped when they explained that my parents could face criminal charges for their actions. The legal team uncovered something even more disturbing. My parents had been transferring funds to Monica's account long before they ever admitted it to my face. Uncle Warren's intervention, however, was the real game changer. Within hours of my LinkedIn message, my phone lit up with his call. His response exceeded anything I could have hoped for. His voice filled with controlled anger. "I've always known your parents played favorites," he said. The disappointment evident in his tone, but stealing from their own daughter? That crosses every ethical and legal boundary. "Don't worry about the legal fees, I'm handling everything personally." Uncle Warren proved to be more than just talk, he took immediate action. He assembled an elite team of attorneys specializing in estate law and hired a forensic accountant to trace every penny of the misappropriated funds. My chest swelled with gratitude as I watched this powerful support system form around me. Within days, they compiled compelling evidence showing that my parents had been systematically draining the education fund for months, following a calculated plan. The first confrontation happened last Friday. My parents' attorney called, attempting to reach a family settlement. I could feel my heart pounding as he spoke, offering that my parents would cover some of my MBA expenses if I dropped all legal action. The audacity of their proposal made my blood boil. Uncle Warren's response was swift and merciless. "They have two options: return the entire sum plus interest and penalties, or face criminal charges. There will be no negotiations." The steel in his voice made it clear he wasn't bluffing. The reaction from my parents was priceless. My phone began buzzing nonstop with frantic emails. "How could you involve outsiders in family matters? We were going to help you eventually. You're destroying this family." Each message dripped with the emotional manipulation I'd grown up with, but this time, I saw it clearly for what it was. Without responding, I forwarded everything to Uncle Warren's legal team. My fingers trembling slightly, but my resolve stronger than ever. Uncle Warren then revealed the second phase of his strategy. Beyond recovering the money, he was pushing for a comprehensive examination of my parents' financial dealings, suggesting there might be other irregularities we weren't yet aware of. The determination in his eyes told me he wouldn't stop until every stone was turned. Yesterday, Monica finally broke her silence. She sent a lengthy email claiming complete ignorance about the source of the house money. "Mom and Dad said they had savings set aside for us," she wrote. Her words carefully crafted. "I never imagined they would steal your money." She ended by pleading that I be reasonable and work toward a family solution. I forwarded Monica's email to Uncle Warren, my heart heavy but my mind clear. His response was blunt: "Send this to the attorneys immediately." It proves she knew about the money after the fact but made no effort to return it. That makes her complicit. The realization that my sister was willing to benefit from this theft, even after learning the truth, felt like another betrayal. This morning brought the most satisfying development yet. My parents' lawyer called Uncle Warren in a panic. The forensic accountant had discovered that my parents had been using their power of attorney to transfer funds even before Grandma Edith passed away. My stomach turned at the thought they had been planning this while my grandmother was still alive. This revelation could substantially increase the severity of the charges. Now my parents are desperately trying to backpedal. Mom left a tearful voicemail begging me to call them, promising they would find a way to pay back the money. Dad sent an email acknowledging they may have made a mistake, but insisted they were just trying to help the family. The desperation in their messages was palpable. A stark contrast to their laughing dismissal of my concerns just weeks ago. Uncle Warren's advice was crystal clear: don't respond to anything. Let them feel the tension. They laughed when you felt powerless. Now it's their turn to be in a tough situation. The justice in his words resonated deeply with me. None of this would have been possible without Philip Lawrence's extraordinary support. Beyond providing an outstanding reference letter, He's already approved my leave of absence for when I begin my MBA program. His faith in me feels like a balm on the wounds my family inflicted. You're showing remarkable composure, Aaron, he told me today. His eyes reflecting genuine admiration. Few people could handle this situation with such professionalism and grace. His words warmed me, providing validation I never received from my parents. Unless my parents return the entire sum plus penalties. The legal team is preparing to file formal charges next week. Uncle Warren estimates they'll need to sell assets to cover everything. But as he pointedly stated, that's their problem, not yours. The firmness in his voice reassured me that I wasn't being vindictive, I was simply demanding justice. I've temporarily relocated to a friend's place while this unfolds. When my parents attempted to storm into my apartment building, security had already been instructed to deny them entry. Uncle Warren has also engaged a private investigator to document any attempts by my parents to contact me, evidence that could potentially demonstrate harassment if needed. The protective measures around me feel like the support I should have had all along. 3 weeks have passed since my last update, and the situation has deteriorated dramatically for my parents. I can finally share the details of how our legal strategy has developed. The forensic investigation revealed far more than we anticipated. When we filed our initial court documents, the first bombshell dropped when Uncle Warren's team discovered that my parents had been abusing their power of attorney over Grandma Edith's finances during her final months. The evidence wasn't just about my stolen MBA fund, it showed they had been systematically moving money around to funnel it to Monica long before Grandma died. My heart ached thinking about how they betrayed her trust while she was still alive. During the initial hearing, I couldn't help but notice their lawyer's expression. It was evident he had no idea about the extent of their financial misconduct. After our legal team presented the documented timeline of transactions, he actually requested a recess to speak with my parents privately. The tight knot in my stomach loosened slightly as I watched them follow him out, their shoulders hunched. I later learned he confronted my parents for withholding critical information and is now considering withdrawing from their case. Even their own attorney couldn't defend their actions once he knew the truth. The most shocking revelation came from Grandma Edith's former caregiver. After seeing our legal notice in the estate documents, she reached out to Uncle Warren directly. My eyes welled with tears. As I read her statement, Grandma had explicitly discussed the MBA fund with my parents multiple times during her final months, making it abundantly clear the money was solely for my education. These conversations were meticulously recorded in the caregiver's notes, as she had been keeping a detailed care diary of all family interactions. The betrayal cut even deeper knowing they had nodded and agreed to her face while already planning to divert the funds. Monica's involvement has taken an interesting turn. After realizing the legal implications of accepting stolen funds, she hired her own attorney. This created a serious rift between her and our parents, who expected her to stand united with them. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness watching their alliance crumble under pressure. My parents panicked when Monica's lawyer advised her to distance herself from the situation. The perfect family image they had cultivated for years was disintegrating before their eyes. The house situation has become particularly chaotic. The court is now investigating the purchase since the down payment came from stolen funds. The mortgage lender has been notified and is reviewing Monica and Gregory's loan application. If my parents falsified any financial records they co-signed, they could face a fraud investigation on top of everything else. The domino effect of their decisions keeps growing, affecting far more than they ever anticipated. In a surprising twist, Uncle Warren's team also discovered that my parents had been telling members of our extended family for months that I had agreed to give Monica my MBA fund. They had been fabricating this narrative in preparation for questions about the money transfer. My blood boiled thinking about how they had lied about me to everyone we know. Now, several family members have come forward with emails and messages from my parents corroborating this false story. The evidence of their deliberate deception continues to mount, removing any doubt about their intentions. With each new discovery, I feel both vindicated and deeply hurt that the people who should have protected me worked so methodically to undermine my future. The deposition was the most satisfying development yet. My father was trying to act all high and mighty, sitting there all stiff in his fancy suit like he still had everything under control. But the moment crumbled when Uncle Warren's attorney produced evidence of their calculated scheme. I felt my chest tighten as I watched my father's face drain of color, his confident facade collapsing as he struggled to explain what they had done. My mother completely lost her composure when she finally admitted under questioning that they never had any intention of repaying the money they had stolen. Her carefully maintained image fell away as she snapped at the attorneys, revealing the true nature I'd always sensed beneath her polished exterior. Their attempts to control the damage have been almost comical, despite numerous recorded conversations with Grandma Edith and her attorneys. They're now trying to claim they were confused by the wording of the will. I can still feel the bitter taste in my mouth as I watch them attempt this transparent lie. This is their third attorney, 2 have already resigned rather than continue representing them. Now they're frantically scrambling to reach a settlement, the desperation evident in every communication. Our legal team outlined the final terms with crystal clarity, making it abundantly clear there was no room for negotiation. Every cent they took must be repaid with interest accruing from the day they first misappropriated the funds. They're also responsible for covering all our legal expenses, including the forensic investigation, which has become quite costly. I felt a surge of vindication seeing the numbers laid out so clearly. We also demanded they cease all gaslighting and attempts to rewrite history, requiring a formal written admission of their misconduct. The thought of them having to document their betrayal in writing brought me a satisfaction I hadn't anticipated. Finally, they must sign a legally binding agreement to stop all communication with me, no more using family members as messengers, no manipulative messages, no surprise visits. The prospect of this clean break feels like finally being able to breathe after years underwater. My parents' social status is crumbling around them. Several of their friends have quietly reached out to express their shock, and I can sense the uncomfortable mix of curiosity and horror in their voices. Word has spread rapidly throughout their neighborhood, the whispers growing louder with each new revelation. My father's prestigious golf club is reconsidering his membership, and my mother's bridge club, where she proudly served as treasurer for years, has asked her to resign. People are uncomfortable associating with someone who would steal from their own child. The social rejection clearly cuts them deeply, perhaps more than the financial penalties. Monica's situation is deteriorating as well. The board of directors at her school has scheduled a meeting to review her position, concerned about having a principal involved in financial misconduct. I feel conflicted about her downfall. Part of me aches for my sister despite everything. Yet I can't deny the justice in seeing consequences for her willingness to benefit from stolen money. Gregory's workplace has initiated an ethics assessment because he co-signed loan documents potentially containing misleading information. Though he didn't steal the money directly, his complicity has now put his own career in jeopardy. The ripple effects of my parents' actions continue to spread, touching everyone involved. The latest development brings a particular satisfaction. Remember how my parents laughed when I first mentioned legal action? Uncle Warren's team recently filed a motion to freeze their assets to prevent further financial fraud. My heart was racing when I found out, and I figured this would finally get them to care about the issue. Within hours, their attorney was desperately calling, pleading for a settlement conference. The panic in his voice was unmistakable. Uncle Warren remains merciless in his approach. When my parents tried to persuade him to be loyal to the family, he sent a scathing email with the entire extended family copied. Family loyalty? You lost any right to talk about loyalty when you stole from your daughter, and laughed in her face. Get ready to face the consequences of your actions. I could almost feel the collective family gasp as that email landed in everyone's inbox. My continued silence is driving my parents to new levels of distress. They've resorted to using friends and family to contact me on their behalf. But each attempt only strengthens our harassment claims. Their desperation grows more evident with each passing day. A stark contrast to their dismissive laughter just months ago. 4 months have passed since my last update, and I can finally share the resolution of this painful chapter. The outcome of the final court proceedings has been more devastating for my parents than any of us could have anticipated. Let me explain how justice was ultimately served. I'll start with my most visceral memory, watching my parents during the final hearing. When they realized they had no more options. Their carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely. The judge was exceptionally harsh in her closing statements, describing their behavior as a calculated betrayal of both their daughters and their own parents' final wishes. She specifically noted they demonstrated a shocking degree of moral bankruptcy. In laughing at my initial legal threat, the weight of her words hung heavy in the courtroom. The forensic analysis ultimately revealed that my parents had been planning this theft for over a year before Grandma Edith passed away. They had methodically fabricated false family agreements and documented fictitious conversations about my voluntarily giving up the MBA fund. My stomach turned as I reviewed the evidence of their premeditation. The court viewed their actions as particularly egregious. Because of this lengthy premeditation, the financial penalties were severe. Beyond returning my MBA money with interest, they were ordered to pay punitive damages that nearly doubled the original amount. The judge justified the harsh punishment by citing their deliberate malice and repeated attempts to mislead the court. I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness watching the sentence being handed down. The most ironic part? My parents had to sell their home, yes, the very home they inherited from my grandparents, to pay these penalties. No one missed the poetic justice in that outcome. They've dramatically downgraded their lifestyle, now renting a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. Their social decline has been precipitous. The country club membership revoked. Their positions on various community boards lost. The social network my mother carefully cultivated over decades has disintegrated almost overnight. It turns out upper-middle-class suburban society has little tolerance for those who steal from their children and lie about it. The professional consequences have been equally severe. My father, who prided himself on his business reputation, was forced into early retirement. When you've been legally proven to have stolen from your own child's inheritance, no one wants to do business with you. I sometimes feel a pang of sympathy when I think about how thoroughly his identity was tied to his professional standing. His former colleagues now avoid him in local establishments. My mother was forced to resign from her leadership roles in local charities. The final blow came when they were asked to step down from all leadership positions at their church, where they'd been active members for over 20 years. They've turned into outcasts in the neighborhood they used to help build. According to Uncle Warren, Monica and Gregory's relationship may be the most notable casualty. Their dream home. The mortgage company went ballistic when they learned the down payment came from stolen funds. They immediately revoked their loan approval, leaving Monica and Gregory with nothing to show for all this turmoil. They're now facing their own legal problems stemming from their knowing acceptance of stolen money. The weight of these consequences has crushed my sister's carefully constructed life. Monica's career has completely imploded. The school board unanimously voted to remove her as principal, citing ethical concerns and loss of community trust. In their formal statement, since the story has spread throughout the local education community, she's struggling to find even entry-level teaching positions. Her professional identity has been shattered, and I feel a complex mix of justice and sadness watching her reckon with the consequences of her choices. Gregory's situation is equally dire. The zoo placed him on administrative leave pending an investigation into his involvement in the financial misconduct. Though he wasn't directly responsible for stealing the money, His signature on loan documents containing false information raised serious ethical questions. I wonder how much he knew and chose to ignore. The tension was too much for them to deal with, and Gregory packed his bags and left their place last week. He accused Monica of being just like her parents, while she blamed him for not being supportive enough during the crisis. They're now in the process of ending their engagement. The collateral damage from my parents' actions continues to spread outward like ripples in a pond. Uncle Warren's strategy of complete social and legal ruin succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. When my parents made one final desperate plea for family loyalty, he organized a family meeting, not to reconcile, but to lay out exactly what they had done in front of the entire extended family. My heart pounded as I watched relatives arrive, many still confused about what was happening. During this gathering, he presented a timeline of their deception, detailing the forged documents they created and the lies they told. The universal response from various family members was stunned disbelief. The expressions on the faces of those who had been around my parents for a long time showed they were really shocked. Several family members who had initially tried to mediate the conflict now publicly condemned my parents. The meeting effectively eliminated any remaining family support they might have had. The isolation they now face is largely of their own making. The most poignant moment came when my mother's sister, who had always been one of their staunchest supporters, stood up and declared, "I don't even recognize who you are anymore." The pain in her voice reflected the collective family devastation. As for me, I've emerged stronger than before. My MBA fund has been fully restored, along with substantial damages. The financial victory, while significant, feels secondary to the emotional vindication. Beyond recovering my money, I've been accepted into a prestigious MBA program with a merit scholarship. Philip Lawrence's reference letter praised my exceptional skills and integrity in handling this ordeal. His belief in me continues to be a source of strength. My company has been incredibly supportive, approving my leave of absence for the MBA program and even promising an executive position upon my graduation. Your handling of this situation demonstrated that you possess the judgment and resilience essential for senior leadership, Philip told me, his confidence warming me more than any parental praise ever had. Uncle Warren has become a true mentor figure in my life. He's already discussing potential investment opportunities after I complete my MBA, and has introduced me to his extensive business network. I've relocated to an upscale apartment in a gated complex that keeps my parents at bay. The doorman has their photos and strict instructions not to admit them. Their phone numbers and email addresses have been blocked, with all communication attempts now routed directly to our legal department. The peace this barrier provides is invaluable. The final twist of the knife? The zoo where Gregory worked is right next door to my parents' new apartment. They must see this daily reminder of where their downfall began every time they look out their window. As Uncle Warren dryly noted, karma can have a wicked sense of humor sometimes. Yesterday, I received an anonymous letter from someone in their social circle. Apparently, my mother rarely leaves home now except for essentials. My father reportedly spends hours sitting alone in a nearby coffee shop, staring into space. Their once busy social calendar is completely empty. Part of me aches for them, despite everything. As I prepare to start my MBA program, I often think about Grandma Edith's words. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you. Her wisdom proved more prophetic than she could have known. With her foresight and Uncle Warren's help, I've not only secured my education fund, but also taught my parents a life-altering lesson about consequences. That concludes my story. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. While I never wanted things to end this way, I'm at peace knowing that justice has been served. My name is Ava. Recently, I achieved a lifelong dream. I bought a condominium for myself. All my life, all I've ever wanted was to own a place of my own, that's it. Growing up, my parents never allowed me to have my own space. But it was also because I was born into a struggling family and we didn't have much. My parents weren't equipped to be parents, they had me not because they desired a child, but because of pressure from their extended family. In our community, choosing to remain childless is heavily frowned upon. Hence, our relatives essentially pressured my parents to have at least one child, to fulfill societal norms, and so I was born, not out of love or readiness, but out of obligation. While my parents had no savings and barely managed to make ends meet, I was an additional financial burden on them. We lived in the most affordable housing they could find, often places that were cramped, poorly maintained, and frankly, unsafe at times. Even so, paying rent was a constant struggle. I can still remember nights when we skipped meals, pretending we weren't hungry, just to ensure we didn't run out of the limited food we had. My clothes were always hand-me-downs or donations, often ill-fitting or worn thin. But they were all we could afford. The few toys or possessions I owned were sometimes donated by kind strangers. My father, David, worked at a local warehouse, earning just enough to keep us afloat. Unfortunately, even the little he earned wasn't always used responsibly, as he had a drinking problem. My mother, Susan, on the other hand, occasionally worked as a house cleaner, but her priorities were also primarily focused on her own indulgences, getting her hair done, buying new clothes, or purchasing lottery tickets. Little was left for necessities, let alone anything that might make life easier for me. I attended public school, and from the very beginning, I realized I didn't quite fit in with my peers. My clothes were often stained, my hair unwashed, and I lacked the basic hygiene and appearance that most of my classmates took for granted. This made me an easy target for bullying. I still vividly recall how cruel some of my classmates were. They teased me, mocked my scent, and ridiculed my appearance. As a child, I always struggled with poor coordination and desperately needed physical therapy. I begged my parents for weeks to get me help. After almost a month of pleading, they finally relented, albeit grudgingly. When I finally started therapy, I was overjoyed. For the first time, I felt like I could move with more ease and confidence. I could participate in activities better, and I felt like I finally had a chance to fit in at school. But my happiness was short-lived. My bullies at school, in an act of senseless cruelty, broke my therapy equipment just for fun. And I was left devastated. I was too scared to tell my parents what had happened. I knew they would blame me for being clumsy or careless instead of understanding what had actually happened. I felt utterly helpless. Fortunately, a kind coach at school, Mr. Harrison, stepped in. He noticed what had happened, and without making a fuss or embarrassing me further, helped me get replacement equipment. He didn't tell my parents about it, which was a huge relief. Throughout my childhood and teenage years, I never felt content at home. My parents were deeply unhappy in their own lives and marriage, and they consistently channeled that frustration towards me. David was strict to the point of being emotionally abusive. He would yell at me if I so much as raised my voice, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells around him every single day. Susan was just as controlling, though in different ways. She micromanaged every aspect of my academic life, dictating which classes I should take and which extracurriculars I should join. She constantly urged me to focus solely on subjects that would lead to a lucrative career. At the end of the day, according to my parents, all I was supposed to do was keep my head down and excel academically. They would constantly remind me that it was my responsibility to save them from their financial struggles, and they believed the only way I could achieve this was through exceptional academic performance. My success wasn't about me, it was about them and their dreams of escaping hardship. When they realized I was naturally gifted in academics early on, their excitement was overwhelming. My parents took every opportunity to boast to their friends or neighbors about my achievements, as if they had played any significant role in my success. My parents cared little for my well-being or happiness, they were only concerned with what I could do for them. I carried the weight of their expectations on my shoulders, and it often felt suffocating. when I applied to university and received a full scholarship due to my academic excellence and low-income background. It felt like a glimmer of hope amidst years of struggle. My parents were overjoyed. In their minds, my university education was a golden ticket to a better life for them. They believed I would land a high-paying job after graduating, and that would transform their lives, allowing them to escape the poverty and hardships they had always known. However, once I arrived at university, my perspective began to shift. Being away from home for the first time was a revelation. For the first time, I experienced what it was like to live without the constant shadow of their control, expectations, and anger hanging over me. I realized that I wasn't obligated to live my life solely for their benefit. Hence, I started to slowly detach myself from them. I refused to meet them when they offered to visit me at university, citing a busy schedule with academics or projects. I stopped going home during breaks and instead spent holidays with my university friends, whose homes were warm, inviting, and far removed from the toxic environment I'd grown up in. When I began working part-time to support myself, I hid this information from my parents, as I didn't want them to demand my earnings. Throughout all of this, my parents were very unhappy with my behavior and couldn't understand why I had changed. Once they found out about my part-time job, they demanded that I send money back home. When I refused, they berated me over the phone, hurling insults and accusations, calling me ungrateful and selfish. They even resorted to threats, claiming that if I didn't send them money, they would show up at my university unannounced to embarrass me or, worse, talk to my friends about how selfish I was for not helping out my own parents after all the sacrifices they had made. In the end, I had no choice but to send them some money. When I graduated, I saw it as my chance to finally break free. I secured a job in another state and left overnight without telling them. I changed my phone number, hoping to cut all ties and start fresh. For a while, it worked. I felt a sense of relief and independence that I had never known before. But my peace didn't last long. Somehow, one of my distant relatives shared my whereabouts, and my father, David, eventually found me at my workplace. I was filled with rage seeing his face. When I confronted him, he berated me for cutting off all contact with them, and started to tell me how, as his daughter, I could not just abandon him and Susan. I pointed out to him that I wanted nothing to do with him and asked him to leave. However, David told me that judging from my office building and my professional attire, he felt I had definitely secured a good-paying job. I tried to deny it, but he wasn't fooled. He then told me I needed to start sending him $800 every month, without fail, and claimed that this was the only way he and Susan would stop bothering me. I was furious, not just at his audacity, but at the realization that even after all these years, my parents still saw me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. It was extortion. Plain and simple. They weren't interested in my happiness or my success, they only cared about what they could take from me. I could have refused him, but this was my first job, just fresh out of university. And I didn't want my parents to jeopardize my career by showing up at my workplace repeatedly or even gossiping to my boss or coworkers about our family issues. That would just be humiliating. So, I agreed to give in to his demand. For the past 10 years, I have sent money back home every month just to prevent my parents from re-entering my life. Currently, I earn a very comfortable salary, and the $800 I send back home doesn't significantly impact my finances. It only brings me peace since they haven't bothered me ever again. They do keep tabs on me through social media or through my distant relatives, but they have not demanded anything else. I have no idea what they do with this money, and I have never bothered to ask them. Recently, when I bought this condominium for myself, I decided to throw a large housewarming party. I knew there was a chance my parents would find out through social media. For the first time in my life, though, I didn't care. I wanted to celebrate this huge milestone in my life. Unsurprisingly, my parents did find out about my new condo through social media. Susan called shortly after seeing the post. Her voice dripped with accusation as she asked why she and David hadn't been invited to the party. I answered bluntly, sending them money every month was more than enough. I didn't see the need to have them in my life on top of that. My honesty clearly offended her. She launched into one of her usual tirades, going on about how children are supposed to live for their parents, and insisted that every other parent she knew had a good relationship with their children and that I was the only exception. She demanded to know why I hated her and David so much, and why I couldn't just get over the past and be an ideal child to them. I had heard all this before, and I wasn't in the mood to entertain it further. I tried to make up an excuse that I was busy and didn't have the time or patience to listen to her lecture. But this time, she didn't hang up. Instead, she told me that this wasn't the only reason why she had called. This is when her tone shifted. She then went on to say that David had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition in the past few months. I was stunned. This was the first I'd heard of it. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. I mean, I really doubted whether or not she was being truthful, but if it was really the truth, then I didn't want David to suffer. Even though he and I aren't close anymore. Over the years, I had resented my parents so much, but now, hearing about his dreadful illness, I felt a bit sympathetic. I asked Susan why she didn't tell me about this earlier. Susan confessed that she and David felt guilty to inform me when they had already been taking $800 from me every month. However, she went on to justify that neither of them could have survived without my money. They had both only ever earned minimum wage, and my money had really helped them over the years. However, now, with David unable to work due to his illness, their financial situation had worsened even more. Susan's part-time work simply wasn't enough to cover even basic needs, let alone the added medical expenses. She went on to beg me to meet with them, emphasizing that it might be too late for David if I didn't come and visit him soon. She said that nothing would make him happier than seeing his only child come to check in on him. Her words were emotional, almost desperate. And for the first time in years, I felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't because I believed I owed them anything, but because I couldn't ignore the gravity of the situation. David might have been a neglectful father, but he was still my father. And now he has a heart problem. I didn't even know how serious it was, what his prognosis was, or whether he truly didn't have much time left. After mulling it over for a couple of days, I made a decision. I would give them one last chance. I couldn't visit them because of my work, but I would let them visit me instead. However, it would be on my terms. I booked train tickets for them to travel to my city and arranged for them to stay at a hotel for one night. I decided not to have them stay with me in my condo, as I wasn't ready for that level of closeness. However, I had invited them over to my place for lunch so we could sit down and talk. The day my parents came to visit, I wasn't sure what to expect. As soon as I saw David, it was clear that he was seriously ill. He looked frail, exhausted, and could hardly stand properly. He handed me a stack of medical records and hospital bills as proof, and as I looked through them, I realized that Susan had spoken the truth. This wasn't some manipulative ploy. They weren't lying about his heart condition. The cold, hard reality of his diagnosis was laid out in those documents. During our conversation, David, surprisingly, apologized to me for his past behavior. He told me how sorry he was to have asked me for money every month. I nodded in understanding. For a moment, it felt like he might truly understand how much his actions had cost me emotionally. We then talked about my life here and my work. Throughout their visit, my parents kept saying how proud they were to see me living in such a luxurious condominium on my own. They couldn't believe I had such a large and well-furnished space all to myself. They commented once or twice on how it was too big for just a single person like me. Susan casually mentioned how she would love to stay at my place for a few days and explore the city since they'd never been here before. I immediately shut her plan down. I reminded her that I'd already paid for the hotel for their one-night stay and their return train tickets. If they didn't leave as planned the next day, then they'd have to figure things out on their own because I wouldn't be helping them. Susan went silent, clearly taken aback. David asked why I couldn't be kinder to them, especially since this was the first time we'd even seen each other in so many years. His tone suggested that he thought my coldness was unjustified, that it wasn't fair of me to treat them this way. I scoffed, unable to hold back all the resentment that had been building inside me for years, and pointed out to them that both of them had done nothing for me growing up, nothing to nurture or support me emotionally or materially. They had treated me like their golden goose, exploiting my academic success for their own benefit while giving me little in return. I reminded them that despite everything that had happened between us, I was still sending them money every month. Over the years, they had never once checked up on me or been there on my bad days. The only reason they were even here was because David had a heart condition. Hence, they can't really blame me for how I feel. I don't have any attachment to them anymore. Hearing this, David's face went red in embarrassment, and Susan burst into tears. I guess I was a bit too harsh, but this was the complete truth. I could have easily cut them off financially, but I hadn't. The $800 a month I sent them was a way to keep them at arm's length. Sending money was easier than dealing with their drama every other month. It kept them quiet, prevented them from showing up and embarrassing me, and, most importantly, ensured that no one in my new life found out about my deeply dysfunctional and toxic family. My parents were a constant source of shame, and I wanted to keep their existence far away from the life I built for myself in this city. So, anyway, after having lunch, I asked them to go back to the hotel since I felt like we had talked enough. But apparently, David wasn't finished. He stopped me and said he had something else to ask. Instantly, I knew this was their plan all along. Clearly, they hadn't just come to see me because they missed me. There was always an ulterior motive when it came to them. I asked him straight up what it was that he wanted from me this time. This is when David began to beg. He literally pulled out his medical bills again, pointing to the overwhelming costs of his treatment, and said that he simply couldn't afford to pay those bills. He told me that he knew how shameless this seemed, but that he was hoping I could step in to help. I firmly told him that I wouldn't be doing that since sending them money every month was more than what they deserved. My dad then gestured to my apartment and pointed out that if I could afford to buy such a luxurious place, then surely I could afford to pay for his heart treatment. He begged me that he had no other options except me. I pointed out to him that his medical bills were not a meager amount, and there was no way I could afford to clear them, even with this job. This is when David suggested that I could perhaps sell my condominium, so I could then use the money to cover his medical expenses. He claimed that his health was more important than any materialistic thing I might own, and that, as his daughter, this was the least I could do for him. Susan, too, joined in, begging me to do this one last thing for them. She promised, over and over, that if I just paid off these medical debts, they would never ask me for anything ever again. She literally had tears in her eyes, swearing up and down that they would leave me alone forever if I helped them this final time. Honestly, the sheer entitlement in David's suggestion, coupled with Susan's theatrics, left me speechless for a moment. They truly were never satisfied. Every time, they just kept asking me for more and more. They truly believed that I owed them my life, that my achievements, my stability, and even my home were somehow theirs to claim whenever they needed them. Despite their apologies earlier, this moment laid bare the truth. They still saw me not as a person, but as a lifeline, a resource to be used whenever they needed me. I wasn't even surprised. Deep down, I had always known this visit couldn't just be about reconnecting or making amends, it was always about what they could get from me. David's health was just another tool they were using to extract more from me. The truth was, even though I wanted David to live, at the end of the day, his health was his own responsibility. David had made his choices, he drank and gambled for years, neglecting his family and himself. So why should I help him by cleaning up his mess? Also, I had been sending them money for years, so why couldn't they just use that money during this medical emergency? So I confronted them outright, asking why they hadn't saved any of the money I'd sent them. Susan, looking flustered, tried to justify it. She explained how they had used the money to pay rent and buy groceries, which I could somewhat understand. But then she admitted they had also used some of it for leisure activities. I asked them why they would do that instead of saving the money for their future. And Susan argued that she and David deserved to experience life since they'd never had the chance to live fully before. When I had started sending them $800, they could finally use that money however they wanted, so they used it to go out and enjoy themselves. She also justified that she and David had always assumed they would eventually live with me as they got older because, after all, I was their child. And children are supposed to take care of their parents in their final years. Hearing that was the final straw. I shook my head in disbelief. Who says I'm going to take care of you and Dad when you are older? Definitely not me. Listen, what you did with my money over the years is your choice, I told them coldly. But don't come crying to me now when you are facing these issues. Because of your lack of planning. I'm not giving you another penny. My words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and final. My parents, realizing I was serious, tried to argue with me. David's frustration flared up again. And Susan's tears resumed as she begged for me to reconsider. But I just leaned in and warned them, I think I am done having this conversation. I want you to leave my house now. If you don't leave, I'll even cut off the $800 I send you every month. The room went silent. My threat had its intended effect. My parents stopped talking immediately. They knew I wasn't bluffing. And they knew they couldn't afford to lose the money I was already sending. Although they still looked pissed, they gathered their things and left me alone. Since they left, I talked to my boyfriend, Michael, and some of my friends about it. And everyone seemed to think I was too harsh on my parents. Especially with David's heart condition diagnosis. They say I should be more compassionate. And consider helping cover some of his bills, at least. So, ID to hear. Okay, there are 2 questions that most of you have asked under my post. Why did I give money to my parents all these years? I thought I made myself clear in my main post. But I'll say it again. Yes, I could have easily chosen not to send them any money. But I didn't want them to show up at my door or go to my coworkers or friends. Also, it just wasn't worth all the trouble of fighting with them. Instead, I gave them the $800, and that shut them up. They never asked for anything more. And left me alone. $800 doesn't mean much to me since I've been working in corporate for years and steadily moving up through the ranks. Plus, being child-free, I have more than enough for myself. Why did I allow them to visit me? My dad is ill, that's undeniable. During our lunch, I could see it in his face and hear it in the way he talks. He doesn't look well. So I don't regret that I met them. I think deep down, I knew this was maybe my last chance to say what's been on my mind to David and make him realize how much he and Susan made me suffer. Also, they are my parents. Yes, they're incredibly toxic, and I don't love them in the way most people love their parents. But they are still my parents. I guess a part of me just hoped that maybe they had changed. That they genuinely missed me or felt regret for how things turned out. It's been 2 weeks since my last update. I thought after my last conversation with my parents that they wouldn't bother me anymore. However, it turns out they hadn't left the city yet. My parents showed up at my doorstep today. It's the weekend, so I was at home, enjoying some peace and quiet. When I heard the doorbell ring, I was shocked to see my parents standing at my door through my video doorbell. I thought they were long gone by now. I opened the door a crack, just to talk to them. My parents asked if they could come in. But I refused and asked them what they were doing here. This is when Susan started to say that she and David had stayed behind in my city for a few extra days, taking the time to explore. Apparently, over the course of their short stay, they had fallen in love with my city. She went on to talk about how it was so much better than where they lived, mentioning how even the doctors and hospitals here could offer more advanced treatment options for David's heart condition. According to her, they had already visited 1 or 2 clinics and spoken to doctors who had given them hope about David's condition. Then, David took over the conversation. He admitted he knew I didn't want anything to do with them, but this was apparently his last chance to live. He said he and Susan had decided to stay back and start treatment at one of the best hospitals in my city, and wanted me to pay for his treatment. He demanded that because he and Susan would be staying here for a couple of months, or maybe more, that I could either arrange a place for them or allow them to move in with me. He claimed that once he was cured, he and Susan would leave and go far, far away, freeing me of their burden forever. I looked at David like he had lost his mind and reminded him about our past conversation. I thought I had been clear enough. I told them that I didn't care where they wanted David to get treated, but that if they wanted to stay and get their treatment in this city, then they would have to pay for everything themselves. They were crazy to even assume that I was going to help out in any way. Susan argued, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and desperation, that if I didn't help them, they wouldn't leave my doorstep. That's when I realized they thought they could just force me to give in to their demands. They were actively trying to force me into a corner, thinking that they could emotionally manipulate me into giving in. I had had enough. I immediately closed my door and called the authorities on them. I reported my parents for harassing me. I wanted to teach them a lesson so they would think twice the next time before just showing up and pressuring me into helping them against my will. The police arrived soon after, and my parents were arrested when they started resisting the officers and refused to leave my doorstep. I felt relieved once they were taken away. Also, I had to explain the situation to my neighbors, who had witnessed the entire commotion outside my place. I live in a very peaceful neighborhood, so it's not every day that toxic parents show up, start demanding things from their children, and refuse to leave until the police are called. Honestly, it's embarrassing that I have such irritating parents. I am a bit shaken up after my parents showed up at my doorstep and refused to leave. After they were arrested, I immediately contacted a lawyer who helped me secure a restraining order against both of my parents, with the video evidence I had of them threatening me at my door. It was clear I had a strong case against them. Getting a restraining order was a necessary measure to make sure they couldn't show up at my doorstep again, or cause any more emotional distress. My parents were released from jail since it was their first offense. They also had to agree with the police to leave me alone, on the advice of my lawyer. I've also made the necessary decision to stop sending them any more money. Clearly, I had enabled their toxic behavior for far too long, and after the way they had behaved, it was time for me to cut them off completely. I also talked to my boss and let him know the situation with my parents. I wanted to make sure he understood the gravity of things in case my parents ever showed up at my workplace to threaten me, which was a real concern. I didn't want this drama to jeopardize my career. Luckily, my boss is incredibly understanding, so I guess my job is safe. In the end, even though the situation with my parents is far from ideal, I feel like I've done what I needed to do to distance myself from them. For their sake, I hope they leave me alone for good.
My name is Sandra Holmes. I am 40 years old and I have no kids from my second marriage. My husband is a kind man who never misses our monthly dates. No matter how busy he is, he always keeps his promises. I know I shouldn't compare him to my first husband, but I have never regretted my divorce, nor have I regretted getting remarried. And this month is our 8th wedding anniversary. My husband had reserved a table at a fancy restaurant with a view of the sea. I thought we were going to have a wonderful time. But then I ran into the last person I wanted to see. It was Jim Stone, my ex-husband from 10 years ago. We were about to leave the restaurant after finishing our meal, when my husband excused himself to go to the restroom. I was admiring the ocean view from the window. What a beautiful view. As I gazed at the sea, I reminisced about the times my husband and I had spent looking at the ocean together. Just then, I heard someone call my name. And when I turned around, "Hey, what's so beautiful? Do you think a regular ocean appears nice to someone like you who's pretty much broke?" Jim. "Hey, long time no see. Why are you... Why? I'm the one who should be asking you why." Jim sat down in the chair my husband had been using, looking at me as if I was a joke. "Yes, those eyes. I put up with those eyes for a whole decade of our marriage. I never thought I'd run into you here. Can someone like you, who doesn't have much money, really eat at a fancy place like this? Can you even afford it? Or are you here for a once-in-a-lifetime thing? It's our wedding anniversary." "Ah. I see. Poor people can only come to places like this on anniversaries, huh? I come here often, you know." "You're still pathetic. Isn't there someone with you?" "Yeah, there is. I just sent her to pay. You know, handling money is a woman's job." I thought he was still the same, always belittling women. "Ah, she's back. Just wait there." The woman who came back was his lover from 10 years ago. She has aged quite a bit, her beauty half what it used to be, and she looks worn out from life. I guess Jim has been living it up while his wife suffers. "You're still wearing shabby clothes, aren't you? Aren't you embarrassed to dress so poorly? Talking to such a terrible man like him makes me feel sick." I turned my gaze toward the restroom, hoping my husband would return soon, and there he was. He had been watching us for a while, as I was talking to another man. Seeing the confusion on my face, he approached us. "Excuse me, do you need something from my wife?" "Your wife? This woman is your wife?" "Yes." "What do you need? You also look poor." "I guess poor women always remarry poor men." "Please don't be rude. My husband is a very respectable man." Jim snorted in disapproval at my response. "Humph. You must be just a useless, broke man." Then he glared at my husband. I thought, this man really hasn't changed at all. Jim was very selfish. Although he worked for a major corporation, it was unclear if he was competent. He was good at sucking up to his boss, though. He blamed his mistakes on his juniors, and loudly claimed their achievements were due to his guidance. How he managed to climb the corporate ladder is beyond me. But by the time we divorced, he had become a manager. Jim claimed he was an elite employee, but I never thought of him as elite. I graduated from a prestigious university. That's what Jim would always brag about. Not just any university, but a very different kind from the ordinary ones. When I was only dating him, I believed his exaggerated stories and thought he was really smart. But when we got married, I discovered that was his only real talent. Plus, he consistently degraded me, even though I only completed high school. Your parents were too poor to send you to university, right? But it's good for you. You didn't have the brains for it anyway. If your family had been rich, you would have had to go to university. But it would have been impossible for someone as stupid as you. My family wasn't poor. I just wanted to start working sooner rather than going to college. Ah, enough with the excuses. You can't handle not making excuses, right? You're an incompetent woman, after all. It's good for women, isn't it? Even if they're incompetent or stupid, as long as they have good looks, they can get by. If they catch a competent man, they can live well. I never imagined he would say such things before we married. So his transformation after marriage shocked me. Moreover, his parents weren't wealthy landowners. His father was just a director. Yet he ruthlessly looked down on anyone he considered poor. You really can't do anything right. You're bad at cooking, you can't clean, and you can't even have kids. Marrying you was a huge mistake. It wasn't a physical issue that prevented me from having kids, it was the stress caused by Jim. My family has always valued frugality and cherishing what we have. But when I cooked with radish leaves to save money, he yelled, "Are you trying to feed me trash?" and threw them in the trash. It made me realize how different we fundamentally were. One day, he told me he had a lover. The woman was much younger than he was. He pushed for a divorce, saying it was better for him to remarry a younger woman. I was happy to divorce such a man. I signed the divorce papers. Who is this man, Sandra? He's my ex-husband, Jim Stone. Oh, I see. Of course, I had told my husband about everything Jim had said and done to me. It had been a painful 10 years, and I had shared it all with tears. Then, without saying anything, my husband just listened and finally said, "Let's be happy from now on. You really dared to marry such a woman like her? Since you're marrying a woman from a poor family, you must be a broke guy too." Well, maybe. Maybe not. Of course, you are. So, you're also a broke man, huh? What? Marrying a poor person means you're broke too, am I right? But, why did you divorce such a wonderful person? Wonderful? Your eyes must be fooling you. Truly wonderful means having a beautiful wife like mine. He indicated his wife as he pointed at her, who stood there looking embarrassed. Is that woman your wife? Yes, she's beautiful, isn't she? She's actually my boss's daughter. Marrying the boss's daughter definitely helps one climb the career ladder faster. Marrying a broke woman like you probably means you're just a regular employee. Too bad. A regular employee? I haven't heard that word in years. What are you trying to prove? Bottom-tier guy marrying a bottom-tier woman. It just means you'll both be broke for the rest of your lives. And you think you deserve to eat in such a fancy restaurant like this? Well, this level of restaurant isn't a problem for us. Yeah, sure, if that's what you think. Just then, a waiter passed by. And my husband pulled out a black card, instructing him to settle the bill. Jim, surprised by the black card, tried not to show it but snorted again. Is that a black card? Showing off a card like that here, you're not used to it. Not used to it? You must have borrowed it from someone. Showing off by flashing the card. But later you'll have to pay back the person who lent you that card, right? I can imagine you're scared to splash the cash in such a place. It's all part of your act. Ha! Funny thing to say. Who would lend their card, I wonder? No matter how naive someone is, they wouldn't lend their card. How would you know that? Jim, you shouldn't say such insulting things. What's insulting? I'm just stating the truth. There's no way you could be wealthy if you married a poor woman like her. My wife is poor, you say? Yes, that's right. Her folks' place is a rundown one-floor home. You know that, right? Or maybe you were too embarrassed to visit her home. So you went to a family restaurant instead? Meeting her parents at a family restaurant for a marriage proposal is unheard of. But for poor people like you, it's probably the norm. Family restaurant, huh? The fact that you thought of that means you must have done your greeting there, right? If you hadn't experienced it yourself, you wouldn't have thought of it. What are you talking about? I'm not short on money. I wouldn't do such a miserable thing. Yet you came up with it. I never would have thought of that. Right, Sandra? What about you? Well, I think I'd like to go to a family restaurant occasionally, but we rarely get the chance. Exactly. What? You're lying. When you were with me, you were happy to go to family restaurants. That's because I had never really been to one before. Oh, I bet. You sure talk big. Coming to such a fancy restaurant just makes you want to act all important. Maybe that's you? It seems like you don't fit in this kind of place. What? You seem out of place, don't you think? There's no way I'm out of place. You're the one who doesn't fit in here. Do you even know who I am? Why would I know you? If you want me to remember you, just become famous. I am well known, though. Well, it's impossible for a regular employee like you to know me, I guess. What? I'm a manager, not a regular employee. Manager? Yes, how about that? Impressive, isn't it? At that moment, the chauffeur arrived, greeted politely, and informed my husband. Sir, your car is ready. Thank you. Huh, what's going on? Oh well, you're probably just the president of some small company. I work for a major corporation, the Holmes Group, and I'm a manager there. Oh, you're still just a manager? Excuse me. You consider yourself top tier. But staying as a manager at your age won't bring any advancement. What, this man works at our company? Yes, he's been with our company for a long time. What do you mean our company? You talk big, but you're just an office lady from a small company. That's right, I don't have kids or any reason to quit my job. But. So, you can't have kids? I was right, you can't have kids. Something's wrong with you. Hey, there's a line to how rude you can be. Sandra is perfectly fine. If she's fine, why can't she get pregnant? Women are supposed to have kids. I don't need to explain that to you. You can't say it because it would prove there's something wrong with her. This man is hopeless. Yes, so bad it's beyond saving. This man's name is Jim Stone. Yes, I understand. He's fired. Sandra, please contact HR. Okay. What? What are you saying? Trying to shock me with that? What company's president are you, thinking you can fool me with such an obvious act? Are you stupid? Jim, my husband is the president of the Holmes Group. What? That can't be. However, the driver, with a look of pity, nodded as he looked at Jim. What, seriously? Is he really our president? Yes, and I am his wife and the vice president of our company. What? That's ridiculous. How could Sandra from a poor family end up as vice president? With just a high school diploma? Such things don't matter. Whether someone graduated from high school or college doesn't determine their worth. That's ridiculous. I will never forgive anyone who insults my wife. No, there's a union, yes, there is a union. The union will protect us employees. You're a manager, right? Managers are not union members. So, you are not protected by the union. Didn't you know that? Seriously. Well, you better brace yourself. Since you insulted my wife, you must face the consequences. Oh no. Jim had a stunned look on his face, but my husband didn't care and asked me if we should go. Then, we left the table. That night, perhaps bothered by the afternoon's events, Jim called. His attitude was completely different from his arrogance earlier. Sandra, it's been a while. What do you mean? We already had a talk this afternoon, Jim. Ah, yes. What can I do for you? Your dismissal hasn't been issued yet. Ah, you guys were just joking, right? Huh? What do you mean? About you being the vice president and your husband being the president. No, they're all true. I'm surprised you don't know who your own company's president and vice president are. Why would you be the vice president, though? Because the best way I can help my husband is from the vice president's position. No. But it's strange. Why would a high school graduate be the vice president? It's not strange at all. I only graduated high school because I wanted to start working early. But after we separated, I acquired a college degree. Huh, really? Yes, there are schools you can do from home. So, you really are the president's wife? Yes. How did you manage to marry the president? When did you get married? We got married after I divorced you. I met the president soon after, and we dated for about 2 years before getting married. Why would the president take an interest in someone like you? Stop being so rude. Oh, sorry. Connections are mysterious, aren't they? I just happened to meet the president. Even so, why would he marry someone broke like you? Is he a philanthropist? No one marries for charity. If he's not a philanthropist, did he marry you to make you his slave? It's odd otherwise. Maybe today you got lucky to be taken to a fancy restaurant. But usually, you must be having plain, poor meals, right? And living a difficult life where you can't even buy what you like, am I right? Why would you think that? That's not true at all. You're the only one who would do such a thing. There's no way you could marry such a rich man. Why do you think so? Rich people have connections with politicians and other wealthy people. If a poorly raised woman like you shows up at their parties, it would embarrass the president. Or maybe he lets his mistress attend those instead. You're making wild assumptions. If you keep looking down on me like this, you'll truly regret it. I'm just concerned for you. A woman with a poor upbringing like you marrying a rich man like the president will only suffer. A regular employee's husband would suit you better. Marrying someone richer than me. You must be a foolish woman who can't see ahead. Who's the fool here? If you called just to say that, I'm hanging up. No, wait. I'm not trying to look down on you. It's just true that you come from poverty, that can't be helped. Thinking I'm looking down on you for that is completely wrong. You say I come from a poor family, but my father is wealthy. Your family is poorer than mine. I didn't say it back then because of your pride. Your family home isn't even half the size of mine. Your father is just a department head, and you're still just a manager. That's not true. When I proposed to you, you were living in a small single-story house. That was because we were renovating our home then. We had stored all our belongings elsewhere. It was just a temporary residence, no need to move to a big house, my mother said. That can't be true. You don't have to believe it, but since the renovation is finished. Even if you say you want to visit my parents at home, you've stubbornly refused to go again. I couldn't tell you the truth. Who would visit such a poor, run-down house? You really are hopeless. Then, I'll send you a picture. This is my family home. You'll see from the picture. The photo I sent was of a large mansion. That's my house. I lived there for a while after our divorce. What? That can't be true. It's true. If this is true, then why were you working as an office lady in a small company? If you're so rich, you wouldn't need to work. And if you did work, wouldn't it be at a large corporation? Indeed, my father is the president of a major company. That company was a new one he started. When it was time to decide who would be the president, it was decided that my brother would take the role. So, I volunteered to handle the administrative work. Now, that company has advanced to the top of the industry. Is that true? Were you really so rich? Yes, this is the truth. This is the real me that you used to look down on. So, that's why you could marry the president? That's not it. I met the president because we shared the same hobbies. We met through our hobbies and hit it off. He didn't know I was the daughter of a wealthy family. And I didn't know he was the president. So, you are at the company where I work because of that? How long have you been at that company? I joined the company right after our divorce. I had a connection by chance. Why? When you were with me, you were a clerk at your brother's company. And after we divorced, you changed jobs? That's right. My brother's company has grown so much. And he told me it was time to do what I love. So I thought I might as well pursue what I've always wanted to do. Then, just as a senior position became vacant, they headhunted me. But at that stage, I still had no acquaintance with the president. He was still someone high above. I don't understand. How can you have connections like that? So, rich people just connect with other rich people? That's why I'm saying those things don't matter. Why do you think like that? It's because of that mindset that you're still just a manager. I wonder why your wife hasn't gotten tired of you yet. She can't get tired of me. I'm supporting her. Keep it up with that attitude, and you'll get what's coming to you. Anyway, that's the situation, so stop belittling me already. I wasn't trying to belittle you. I really thought you were poor. About that dismissal you mentioned this afternoon. Oh, yes, your dismissal. After all the mocking you did, it's only natural you'd be dismissed. That would make me in a tough spot. Can you talk to the president so I don't get fired? What? You were just mocking me tremendously, and yet you ask not to be dismissed? That's impossible, you know. I have nothing but resentment towards you. Why? The fact that you don't think you're resented is truly astonishing. What have I done to you? There's too much to even remember, it's that much. I bet your wife thinks the same as me. Why don't you ask her what she really thinks? Though I doubt she'll tell you. I only said those things because I thought you were poor. Why do you think I'm mocking you when I'm just being honest? Once words are spoken, they can't be taken back, you know? You should understand that as an adult. I do understand that. Then you should understand why you're being dismissed, right? No, I don't understand at all. Please, I'll be in trouble if I'm dismissed. If it were just about this afternoon, the president might have overlooked it. But then you had to call and ask why this and why that. My husband is here now, frowning. He really thinks you're hopeless. Maybe you should just give up, there's no saving you. No. If the president is right there, why can't you just say so? It's only natural for a husband and wife to be together. Besides, you didn't ask if someone was with me, did you? That's true, but You've poured gasoline on your own fire. You mocked not just me, but my parents and my husband too. Look, I didn't think you'd get this angry. Please forgive me. If I had known you were a wealthy lady, I wouldn't have said such mocking things. I won't say them again, please forgive me. Just give up. I think your dismissal order will come down tomorrow. Wait, please. Jim's voice echoed on the other end of the phone, but I hung up and looked at my husband. The next day, Jim came to the president's office. His face was all white, with dark circles under his eyes. And he seemed to be in a really bad condition. I was in a meeting with my husband, the president, about business matters. But I was startled by Jim's appearance. Jim, what's wrong? I'm very sorry. Jim apologized as he sat down on the spot. Jim, what are you doing? Please, just don't fire me. What do you mean? Of course, the president knew about yesterday's conversation. He had guessed from my responses during the call. And I had detailed Jim's remarks after hanging up. Therefore, his impression of Jim was very poor, and his anger was greater than mine. I am truly sorry again. I didn't know your wife was from a wealthy family. I think she is a perfect match for the president's wife. I also heard she graduated from university, even if it was through correspondence. She's a hard worker, a far cry from my own wife. So you decided on her as your wife, and then you got rid of her, right? What? Jim looked up at the president, wondering how he knew such a thing. Of course, I've told my husband everything. We're married, after all. Or do you and your wife not talk about your pasts? No, it's not like that, but that was a long time ago. I was young then. I thought Sandra was just a poor man's daughter. So I thought it was okay to have a mistress. How does it come to that? Is that why you think it's okay to commit sexual harassment or power harassment? What do you mean? Don't tell me you haven't done it? There are complaints from your female coworkers. They say if our company doesn't handle it, they'll go to the police. Our company was just discussing what to do about it. When your disrespectful remarks came yesterday. It's really hopeless, isn't it? That's right. I wouldn't have thought you were actually harassing or bullying. But watching you yesterday, it seemed all too true. You don't even regard women as people, do you? You think they're below you. No, I never, even if that were true, firing me would be too harsh. Please, show some mercy. Well, indeed, you have a family. If you were fired, you wouldn't be the only one in trouble. That's right. Exactly. My husband smirked and looked at me. So, what do you think, Sandra? How about sending Jim to our Ohio branch? Wait, what? The Ohio branch is in a region with very few people, practically unsustainable as a company. The former president, who came from that town, established the branch there to help the local people. But it's a lonely place with just one employee. The previous employee reportedly went mad from the loneliness. We want you to turn that branch around in 3 years. If you can do that, we'll bring you back here. Of course, if you can't, you'll spend your retirement in Ohio. Thank you. I appreciate it. Under the guise of the president's mercy, Jim set off for the Ohio branch. But both myself and my husband knew it was an impossible task. Having to work tirelessly alone for the small number of town residents. It was obvious that there wouldn't be any profit to be made. Unaware of this, Jim moved to the branch all motivated. His transfer was with his mistress who had been his wife. But surely she wouldn't be satisfied with just the cold and nothing else there. And eventually, she reached her limit. His salary plummeted, and despite being the branch manager in name, his pay was minimal, leading his wife to start yelling. This resulted in daily arguments. And although he boasted that if he turned things around in 3 years, he could return to the head office, his city-bred wife couldn't believe his words. She left the divorce papers and went back to the city. Jim tried his best for a year, but no matter how hard he worked, the population wouldn't increase and no profits would come. Eventually, he realized that no amount of effort here would change anything, and one day submitted his resignation. After leaving the company on his own terms, Jim contacted his wife, but by then, she had found someone new. Jim was not only ignored by her but was beaten up by her new man, and ended up in the hospital. After being discharged, Jim looked for a job, but at his age, he found nothing. And life became harder for him. He lived in a shabby, run-down apartment, and the only job he could find was as a nighttime store clerk. The man who had once boasted of graduating from a prestigious university now stood alone in a store at night. As for me, I continued to be protected by my kind husband, enjoying another wonderful date this month. Marrying him changed my life so much. I'm grateful that Jim and I divorced.
Patty, I've always been telling you, haven't I? I wanted a son to carry on our family name, yet you gave birth to a girl. I don't need someone who's useless like you. Sign the divorce papers and get out of the house with your daughter.
One day, out of the blue, this was what Tony blurted out at my in-laws' house. In his right hand was the divorce paper, and he was holding his mistress on his left side. As I was dumbfounded by his unbelievable claim, his mistress added seriously,
"Hello, I'm Kristen. I'm carrying Tony's baby, and of course, the baby's a boy. We've already confirmed the gender with tests, so I'll be the one to make Tony happy. Please, don't interfere with us anymore. Got it?"
It was as if I was being painted as the villain. Then my mother-in-law Laura delivered the final blow.
"I was completely deceived by you, Patty. I feel sorry for Tony, so never show your face to us again."
There was not a single reasonable person around here. I couldn't understand how they could say such heartless words like that. While glancing at the entrance, I was utterly shocked, but I wasn't surprised or panicked about the situation. "What are you all even talking about? I have been single for a week now. I'm no longer your wife, Tony, so do as you please. Sarah and I will leave."
Patty, have you lost your mind? When do we get divorced? The divorce is supposed to happen right now.
You're the one who lost your mind, Dad. We've already moved to a new house, so bye.
What are you talking about, Sarah? You guys are really stupid.
My husband laughed loudly enough for it to be heard outside as he pointed at us. He may be laughing now, but that won't last long. He has no clue on what's about to happen. I will never forgive my husband. He will surely regret hurting our daughter. As my husband continued to laugh, I calmly began to speak. The stupid one here is you, Tony. I already filed the divorce papers. You just had no clue about it.
Being pushed to the edge really does make people do unexpected things, huh? I never thought you would espouse such nonsense, but I guess this is your true nature. I feel way better knowing I'm divorcing a liar like you.
My husband, along with Laura and Kristen, looked down on me with contempt.
"Really, why did I ever approve of such a foolish daughter-in-law like you? I really want to punch my past self. I wasted my precious son's time. The biggest sin of my life. The only comfort is that you're about to be discarded right now. So just get out, loser." "Oh, Laura, you and Tony are too kind. How could you just listen to her? I definitely made the right choice in choosing Tony. He's such a compassionate man. Patty, stop lying and let Tony go. It's for your own good.
Their smirks were exactly like those evil witches in fairy tales. The heart is revealed through actions, and the ability to upset people with just a laugh is, in a way, a talent. But where there is evil, there is also justice. From now on, I will be the one to judge this evil. They will all regret what they've done. I displayed a video on my smartphone and confronted the three. Do you recognize this?
A video. No. Footage from a camera? What about it?
Oh, isn't this Tony's room? Why do you have footage of Tony's room on your smartphone?
Do they really not understand anything? For people who call others stupid, their brains don't seem to be very sharp. That's exactly why they engage in immoral acts like infidelity so easily and even condone it. At the moment, it all made sense to me. I decided to reveal the truth to the three of them. This is footage from a hidden camera. I have been secretly monitoring you, Tony. I installed a camera in your room. So with that, I found out about your mistress and the pre-filled divorce papers.
What? You installed a hidden camera in my room?
That's why I secretly took out the divorce papers while you were away and submitted them. If you think I'm lying, why don't you go check it? There's nothing left in that drawer. Tony returned from his room half in disbelief, but when he came back, his face was pale. He seemed to have recognized the truth of my words. Laura and Kristen also lost their smiles when they saw his state.
I can't believe it. She already knew.
Well, I'm surprised, but this is convenient, isn't it? It saved me the trouble of submitting them. Kristen, let's remarry right now. Nothing can stop us now.
That's right. When you think about it, there's nothing bad about this. It just sped up the process of getting rid of a useless daughter-in-law like her. This woman couldn't get pregnant with a son anyway. She was never right for my precious Tony. This is a chance for Tony to restart his life.
Laura laughed loudly. As a mother myself, I understand the feelings of a parent who loves their child, but even then, the love she has for her son seems a bit too much. Certainly, my husband had taken over the family business after his father passed away, and he probably earned more than the average person. I knew he had worked hard. After all, we were married. But no matter how adorable a parent finds their outstanding child, it doesn't justify mistreating their spouse. The harsh words thrown at me by Laura from the time we were married are a bitter memory I wish I could forget. It has been truly difficult. My only ally is my daughter, Sarah. She has even been ignored and mistreated by them. I can never forgive them. Only I can protect my daughter. I will make them pay for how they treated us. I pulled out a small piece of paper from the drawer and presented it to the three. Tony and his mother looked at the paper with puzzled expressions.
What is this scrap of paper? A business card?
Hanson Corporation's CEO, Robert Gale? Isn't Hanson Corporation a major client of your company, Tony?
Yeah. Why do you have the business card of the CEO of such a big company? You shouldn't have any chance to interact with a CEO like him.
The two of them spoke as they pleased. Do they think I'm some kind of punching bag? Unfortunately, I'm human and sharp words do hurt. But they seem unaware of this. While that was happening, Kristen looked pale. Noticing her turning pale, Tony spoke up.
Kristen, what's wrong? You look pale.
Of course she would. Wouldn't you be shocked if someone suddenly pulled out your own father's business card?
Huh? Father? What are you talking about?
Seeing my husband's visibly confused expression, I couldn't help but smile. He really knew nothing. Seizing the moment, I raised my voice and stated clearly, Your mistress is the daughter of your client's CEO.
What? No way. Such a perfect coincidence like that can't be true. You must have gone crazy.
I always thought you were a worthless daughter-in-law, but now you're just a jerk trying to frame people. I wonder what kind of upbringing produces such a worthless person like you. I'd really like to ask your parents about this.
I was infuriated by what Laura said, which not only insulted me, but my parents as well. She really insults people as easily as breathing. My daughter puffed up her cheeks in indignation as well. Seeing her like that relaxed me a bit. Emboldened by the comments of Tony and his mother, Kristen confronted me with a defiant expression.
I agree with Tony and Laura. I don't care if he's the CEO of a big company or whatever. I've never met or heard of such a person. Don't make up someone's family out of nowhere, you jerk.
Exactly. I have met Mr. Gale because of my position, but he looked nothing like Kristen. Though I admit judging Kristen as a CEO's daughter makes sense, since she is elegant and intelligent. She's totally on a different level than you.
Right. She must have been raised by wonderful parents unlike you. That also means Sarah's future is predictable, even though she's Tony's daughter with a mother like you.
Laura glaringly sent a contemptuous look towards my daughter. Not to be outdone, my daughter glared back fiercely. Enraged, I slammed the papers I had prepared hard onto the table.
What now? Robert Gale? Christian Gale? Adopted?
This is Mr. Gale's family registry. It proves the identities of Mr. Gale, his wife, and their unmarried child. As written here, Kristen is Mr. Gale's adopted daughter, which is why she doesn't resemble him.
What? Why do you have Mr. Gale's family registry?
Because Mr. Gale and I have a cooperative relationship. After I learned of your affair, I tried to reach out to him. Mr. Gale kindly entrusted me with this family registry. Tony then raised his voice.
What a joke. He's the CEO of a big company. You can't just meet him that easily. That family registry must be fake.
Now you've even resorted to faking documents. What a hopeless woman. Did you think we were so dumb as to be deceived by fake documents like this? You're gravely mistaken. Don't lump us in with someone as dumb as you.
The stupid ones here are you guys. Faking official documents is a crime called forgery of official documents, punishable by 1 to 10 years in prison. I wouldn't commit such a crime just for this. If I got arrested, Sarah would suffer.
Then why are these documents here? You must have prepared these to confuse us.
He seemed desperate to deny any relationship between Mr. Gale and Kristen. Clearly, the idea of his mistress being the daughter of a client's CEO was unthinkable. People tend to shut out information that's inconvenient to them. But that's fine. Whether they face it or not, they're doomed for life. If you think they're fake, that's fine. I'm just letting you know the facts. My firm stance began to change my husband and Laura's attitude. Their smiles vanished and they began to tremble. Tony turned back to Kristen.
Kristen, just to make sure, tell me. You weren't deceiving me, right?
Kristen shook her head vigorously.
That's impossible. Why would I lie to the person I love? Mr. Gale is a stranger to me. I had a child with you because I love you. I would never lie about this.
I couldn't help but give a grand round of applause to Kristen's response. Well done, Kristen. You've shown your unwavering will. You truly love Tony, don't you? I'm moved. So I have a reward for you. Just wait a moment. I hurried out of the living room with puzzled looks stabbing my back. Giving no care to that, I stepped outside and quickly returned with the reward. Sorry for the wait. Here's your reward.
What? No way!
Kristen's eyes widened in shock as she backed away. Unbeknownst to her, Mr. Gale had been waiting outside all along. Furthermore, the door was intentionally left ajar. When Tony presented me with the divorce papers today, I glanced at the entrance with dismay, aware of Mr. Gale's presence. Tony straightened up immediately and greeted as soon as he saw Mr. Gale.
Oh, Mr. Gale, it's been a while. Don't worry about formalities. They mean nothing to me.
Mr. Gale returned Tony's greeting with a cold gaze. A deep wrinkle formed between his eyebrows and his veins popped out.
I've been waiting outside the door, and oh, what an interesting conversation I've heard. Tony, I've come to understand your true nature very well. It's been an enlightening experience to think that there are people who speak such foul words in this world. Don't you think so? Well, you see...
Knowing that Mr. Gale had heard everything, Tony seemed unable to come up with any excuses. He just stood there, dripping with cold sweat and looking down. Mr. Gale also glanced at Kristen, whose shoulders jolted up. Don't you two feel ashamed of what you've done? There are things one shouldn't do as a human. Marriage and love are different. Once you've sworn eternal love, you must at least fulfill the basic responsibilities. Apologize to Patty immediately. His angry voice filled the room. Tony and Kristen shrank back, but Laura stood her ground defiantly.
If eternal love is so important, then Tony and Kristen are deeply in love too. Patty no longer loves Tony. After all, she was the one who filed for divorce. Therefore, it is only natural for two people in love to be together. There is nothing wrong with that.
That is an unbearable justification. Yes, it is joyful when two people in love come together. However, both parties being single is the basic condition. Moreover, there's not only Patty, but also Sarah involved. Disposing of someone because they can't have a son? What era do you think you're living in? If you are living in the present, please update your mindset. This is just unacceptable.
At Mr. Gale's anger, Laura ran out of words to respond. The room fell silent. There was a reason for his anger. In fact, Mr. Gale's wife was infertile and unable to have children. There are still people with outdated mindsets like Tony and Laura, but there are also many who want to have children but can't. Pregnancy and childbirth are sacred, and we mustn't forget that. Mr. Gale could not tolerate his family hurting others for selfish reasons like wanting a son for heir. Tony and Laura were silenced by Mr. Gale, but Kristen's eyes burned with anger. She started to argue back to Mr. Gale directly.
You preach as if you're some kind of saint, but you're selfish too. You adopted me because you couldn't have your own kids, right? Whether it was good for me didn't matter. That was just adults making decisions for their own convenience.
Kristen clenched her fists and yelled with all her might. I don't know the details, but Mr. Gale is a strict man who apparently didn't spoil Kristen with money or material things. This may be why Kristen feels unloved by her father, as they aren't blood related. Tony and Laura seemed confused as the divorce turmoil had suddenly turned into an argument between Mr. Gale and Kristen. They looked at each other uneasily. Kristen, unable to control her emotions, continued to lash out at Mr. Gale.
You just adopted me for Mom's sake, right? Because she wanted a child? Because she was important to you. I was only being used to satisfy someone else. I'm just a tool to you. Everyone thinks they can just use me.
Although I haven't known Mr. Gale long, he seems like a genuinely good person. Even as an outsider, I think Kristen is wrong, but Mr. Gale quietly listened to her.
What? Aren't you going to say anything? Or do you think what I'm saying isn't even worth responding to?
That's not it. It's not that. I'm actually happy.
Happy? Are you crazy? Or is that some kind of weird hobby?
It's the first time you've spoken honestly to me. You've always been a well-behaved child who didn't need much attention. I used to think you were just a quiet kid, but now I see that's not the case. You must have endured a lot on your own.
His eyes softened as he spoke. Kristen's shoulders trembled slightly.
Yes, I have been strict with you, that's true. I won't make excuses. But it was because I love you. They say the opposite of love is indifference, right? I wouldn't bother saying anything if I didn't care.
Stop it! I can't believe you're saying this now. I've never been loved by my family.
Enough, Kristen. You don't understand anything. Even as an outsider, I can see that Mr. Gale cares about you. Yet you just deny it one-sidedly. Right now, you just look like a child throwing a tantrum. I couldn't help but intervene. As a parent myself, I couldn't stand to listen any longer. Being a parent is harder than most can imagine. You can't just quit midway. There's no guarantee of a return for all the effort you pour into your children. Sometimes what you do for their sake can backfire. Even after lovingly raising them, in the end, you have to let go. It's a tough job, isn't it? But the reason parents can keep going is solely the love and responsibility they feel for their children. It's clear that Mr. Gale has more than enough of both. But Kristen seems too stubborn to see the truth right now.
Don't lecture me when you were just dumped by your husband. You're just clinging to him because you can't do anything else. Everything has been taken away from you, and you're just going to keep falling into misery.
The conversation shifted towards me, and seeing that it was their chance, Tony and Laura regained their momentum.
That's right. I don't know much about Kristen's past, but what's certain is that she'll be happy from now on because she's remarrying me.
Yes, Tony is a wonderful man. He was too good for someone like you. Now he can finally start a life with a woman who matches him. I'm looking forward to it. A child's happiness is a parent's happiness.
What they were saying wasn't wrong, but coming from Laura, it sounded insincere. My daughter seemed to think the same, giving her grandmother a cold look. Despite the three showing no signs of remorse, I boldly declared to them, I don't mind. Remarry or do whatever you like, but remember, you'll be the ones regretting it. That's for certain. My husband and his mother swallowed nervously, but still arrogantly took Kristen's hand.
You're complaining it's so lame. Just keep on talking, loser.
Don't bother contacting us anymore. We four, including Tony and Kristen's baby, will live happily together. Goodbye, Dad. I don't think we'll see each other again. Don't expect to see your grandson.
With those final words, the three left the house. After the storm had passed, a silence remained. Mr. Gale was the first to speak.
Patty, Sarah, I'm truly sorry for the rude things my daughter has said.
Please don't apologize. This isn't your fault, Mr. Gale, and it's okay.
What do you mean by it's okay?
Mr. Gale looked puzzled, but I gave him a meaningful smile. There are facts that none of you know yet. They should come to light soon enough. At my words, both Mr. Gale and Sarah could only tilt their heads in confusion. A few days later, I was waiting for a call from my husband at a certain place. It's one of the most luxurious apartments in LA. I quite like the view. It's outstanding. Even if the wait gets long, I doubt I'll get bored. While I was drinking my second cup of coffee, the long-awaited call finally came. I answered with an exceptionally cheerful voice, and then heard my husband's very flustered voice. What's the matter? Calling all of a sudden like this? It's only been a few days since you cut ties with me.
Help me, Patty. Kristen has gone missing.
Oh, really? That sounds serious. But if that's the case, shouldn't you report it to the police? I'm not in the business of finding people, you know.
No, Patty, it's not just that she's gone missing. My ATM cards and credit cards have disappeared too. She had asked me about the pins before, saying we should share important information in case of emergencies. And now my money is being withdrawn like crazy. I don't know what to do.
My husband's words were all over the place, and I just had to laugh. Meanwhile, he continued to rant about something dumb. He seemed utterly clueless and confused. After a good laugh, I finally decided to tell him the truth. You know, Kristen has another man, not just you. She actually has a real boyfriend.
What are you talking about all of a sudden? I'm already so upset. Don't confuse me more.
It's true, and if you want to know, the baby in Kristen's belly isn't yours either.
That's a lie. It has to be. You just have a bad personality, giving me wrong information and looking down, laughing at me like that. You're the worst. I've lost all respect for you.
My husband was so upset he started crying. So I guess Tony and Kristen's romance didn't last long. Is his mother worried? Of course, for me, everything's going according to plan. I'll show you proof that what I'm saying is true. Here's a question for you. Where am I right now?
How should I know? Just go to hell.
Wow, that hurt. But the one who's really going to hell isn't me, it's you. Anyway, the correct answer is right here. I switched to a video call to show my surroundings. Immediately, I could hear my husband scream from the smartphone.
Kristen, why are you with Patty? You two were conspiring against me?
Kristen remained silent, looking down. That's understandable. After all, I now have leverage of her. Tony's not just Kristen here. Let me introduce you to Alex, Kristen's real boyfriend. As I introduced him, Alex appeared on the screen. Yes, I had already made contact with Kristen's actual boyfriend. We had just stormed into Kristen's house together. A louder scream came from the other end.
You bastard! How dare you seduce my Kristen? You have my ATM cards and credit cards, don't you? Give them back now, along with the money you stole. I must say, I didn't know anything about this. Not about your existence, nor the ATM cards or credit cards. I like an explanation about this situation too. Kristen?
Alex glared sharply at Kristen as she kept on looking down.
Kristen? What is going on? Who is this man? Your real boyfriend? That's a lie, right? We loved each other so much. Tell me the truth.
Shut up!
What? I can't hear you.
I said shut up! You delusional jerk! What do you mean we loved each other? I never loved you, not even once. It was all in your head. I was only with you for the money, and you easily cheated on me when you had a wife, you jerk.
My husband was so shocked he could hardly close his mouth. After a long silence, he suddenly slumped over the table and started crying. He continued to cry out like a child, unable to have a proper conversation. Meanwhile, Alex was grilling Kristen, and she fired back in a hostile way, making things worse. I felt the urge to go home and relax over coffee with Sarah, but I couldn't just abandon the job halfway. Since there was no more need for me to say, I quietly left my seat and moved to the hallway. All that was left was to patiently wait for my husband to recover. After he had cried enough, Tony finally raised his swollen face. Just when I thought we could wrap things up, he made a surprising suggestion.
Let's start over, Patty. We can still go back to how we were.
What? What are you talking about?
Taking care of Sarah alone must be financially difficult for you, right? Besides, isn't it better for the family to be together? Mom will surely understand.
How conveniently he speaks of family now. A word that should be warm and loving has turned vile because of him. I laughed at him with all the scorn I could muster. No, I'll pass. Do you have any idea how much you've made me suffer? And it's not just about me. What angers me most is that you hurt Sarah. I never thought you would neglect your own daughter after an affair.
I just really wanted a son. There was no other intention, and it's not too late. If we love each other again, a son will come soon.
Please stop saying such disgusting things. There's not an ounce of love left for you and me. I can't even stand to breathe the same air as you, let alone touch you. And you keep talking about a son. But isn't that completely unnecessary now?
What do you mean?
Your misconduct is already well known among our company and business partners. It's being viewed as a problem everywhere, so it's only a matter of time before our existing deals are canceled. Soon you'll struggle with cash flow and the business will become unmanageable. If the company falls apart, what's the use of an heir?
That's...
After that, my husband was silent and seemed stunned. I finished with all the sarcasm I could muster. The only family you have left is your mother. Make sure to get along with her. I pressed the end call button and left Kristen's house. That was the last time I saw my husband. The clear blue sky seemed even more beautiful today. After that, my husband was shunned by everyone from his company and business partners. As expected, the company faced financial difficulties and quickly decided to fold. Tony and Laura's once strong bond took a hit when they started struggling with money, and now they're stuck in a cycle of arguing. The industry spread rumors about my husband, and he has no prospects for re-employment. Laura has never worked a part-time job, so she can hardly start working now, and does nothing but complain at home. My husband manages to get by on day labor, but his standard of living continues to decline. Both he and his relationship with his mother got worse, and it seems they will lead a difficult life forever. For those who saw their child as a mere tool, this was a fitting end. Meanwhile, Kristen did give birth safely but eventually broke up with Alex, her real boyfriend. Perhaps Alex was a decent man. If suddenly you find out your girlfriend was cheating and stole from another, it's normal to want to avoid getting involved in that mess. While he's someone I don't really know, I do hope he finds happiness. After breaking up with Alex, Kristen, who has never worked properly, has no choice but to rely on her father, Robert. But being a strict man, both to himself and others, Robert did not coddle her, but rather pushed her away. Of course, this isn't to say he abandoned her. Robert loves Kristen, which is why he wants her to acknowledge her mistakes, reflect, and live an honest life. I am indebted to Robert as well. I can only hope that some of his wishes reach her. As for me, I now live peacefully with my daughter. While we aren't rich, living without fear of living with toxic family members is truly comfortable. I want to give my daughter all the attention she missed out on. Years later, I was lucky enough to get remarried with my current husband and was blessed with a son. Looking at our son, I am reminded that there are people who can't have kids, despite their desires, and that pregnancy and childbirth are sacred things. These are things I must never forget. Going forward, I would cherish the miracle of my children's birth and vow to find happiness with my new family.
Oh? Is that you, Mandy? The moment I heard that voice, memories of my hellish married life surged back. And I turned around with goosebumps. Standing there was my smirking ex-husband, with a young woman clinging to his arm. The very person who made my first marriage a living hell is now standing right in front of me. Who would have thought we'd meet here? It's been a while, hasn't it? Huh? The ex-wife? Nice to meet you. The young woman next to him greeted me in a high-pitched voice. My ex-husband had his arm around her. You see, this is my current wife. Young and cute, huh? You are nothing compared to her. As I tried to leave, he stopped me and looked me over. Look at you, an old, unemployed, and poor single woman. You're living a miserable life because you couldn't serve me properly. Serves you right. Hey, that's a bit much. But it's true though. I was seething inside. I had to say something. Turning back to them, I asked quietly. Hey, who exactly are you talking about? My name is Mandy Thompson. I've been married to Ben for 2 years. In fact, I was married once before I met my current husband. That marriage was so tragic that I don't even want to remember it. The man I first married was named Steve Owen. We met at a small company where I started working as a fresh graduate. Steve, who was in charge of training me, seemed manly and dependable. Having had little experience in love, I was thrilled when he asked me out. And I quickly agreed to date him. However, Steve had always been somewhat tyrannical. He would get moody when I talked to other male employees, or would behave arrogantly towards restaurant staff. But love was blind. After 2 years of dating, he proposed, and I agreed to marry him. Steve strongly wished that I become a housewife, so I did just that upon our marriage. Once married, I realized that his manly character was just domineering. Now that you're a housewife, do the household chores perfectly. That's your job. He never helped with the housework. No matter how hard I tried, he never appreciated my efforts. Instead, he was always nitpicking how I managed the household chores and finances. Still, I kept doing my best, grateful to be allowed to stay home. 3 months into our marriage, during winter, I came down with a severe cold. Feeling ill since morning, I checked my temperature, over 100 degrees. Chills and dizziness made it impossible to do any housework. When Steve returned from work and saw me wrapped in a blanket, he visibly grimaced. Hi, Mandy. What are you doing lying down? Steve. I think I caught a cold. My temperature is over 100 degrees. Despite my explanation, he frantically looked around the house and scowled. Hey. You haven't done the cleaning or the laundry. I've been feeling ill since the morning, I really couldn't do it. Don't spout such lazy excuses, you're just a housewife. He shouted and then yanked away my blanket. You haven't even prepared my dinner. Make it now. But I told you, I have a high fever. I can't possibly cook. Tears filled my eyes as I pleaded. But Steve didn't care and forced me to get up, then shoved a $10 bill at me. Then, go buy something with this now. What? Don't buy anything for yourself. You skip dinner as a punishment for slacking off. Just buy mine, now. Steve dragged me to the entrance while I was staggering and then threw me out of the house. In the freezing cold, in my pajamas outside. It seemed I wouldn't be let back in until I brought something back. After managing to buy groceries, I collapsed right at the entrance upon returning. Steve glanced at me briefly, snatched the ready-made food by his side, and began eating silently while watching TV. As I lay collapsed in the cold entrance, I heard Steve's laughter from afar, and a tear rolled down my cheek. Yet, I hadn't considered divorce because I didn't want to betray my father, who had been delighted by my marriage. My mother passed away from illness when I was in middle school, and since then, it had always been just my father and me. My father was running a stationery shop and we weren't wealthy. But I had a happy life with my kind father who loved me deeply. When I got married, he said with tears, now I can finally rest easy. Be happy. If I divorced within just 6 months of marriage, it would betray my kind father. I thought I just needed to endure it for myself. Steve's domineering behavior continued. I managed to endure it, exhausting myself through the days of our marriage. About a year into our marriage, bad news arrived. My father was hospitalized with advanced cancer. Dad. I had no idea things had gotten this bad. My father had lost a lot of weight during the short time I hadn't seen him.
Yeah.
I realized too late. They say there's nothing they can do now. As he spoke quietly, I cried. My father gently wiped away my tears and asked, Mandy, are you happy in your marriage? I lied instinctively. I didn't want to make him worried about me on his sickbed.
Yeah.
I'm happy. Steve has been very good to me. Is that so? Well, that's good then. Looking back, maybe my father sensed something then. However, he said nothing more. With the added need to care for my father, life became even harder. Until then, I had spent all my time during the day managing the detailed housework that Steve demanded. But with the nursing of my father, that became difficult. Amidst this life, I asked Steve, I have a favor to ask. Could you please visit my father in the hospital? Huh? Why should I? Steve grimaced as he looked at me. Well, you are his son-in-law after all. I'm sure my father would be happy to see your face. What are you talking about? I don't want to see the face of a dying old man. I stared at Steve in disbelief as he continued, oblivious to my shock. More importantly, don't slack on the housework because you're nursing the old man. Think well about what to prioritize. With that, he left grumpily for the bathroom. Later, as my father's condition worsened and I spent more time in the hospital, Steve, far from supporting me, berated me daily for not doing the housework. On the day of my father's surgery, when I told him I would be away all day, Steve exploded. Hey, don't mess around. What do you think a wife's job is? But it's my father's surgery day. So? What about my meal? The cleaning? The laundry? Can't you manage for one day? As I mustered the courage to say this, Steve sighed dramatically and pulled something out of his bag. It was a signed divorce form. A divorce form. Yes, that's right. I'm supporting you, but if you can't even manage the housework, it's a divorce. But it's about my father. I'm the only family he has. I don't care. If you're saying you won't do the housework because you're accompanying him to surgery, then it's an immediate divorce. Just think well. Steve left these words behind and went off to work. I was stunned, staring at the divorce form on the table. But I had no choice but to accompany my father to surgery. After the surgery, as my father woke up, I was crying by his bedside. "Dad, are you awake?" As I hurriedly wiped my tears, my father spoke quietly to me. "You're really struggling with your married life, aren't you?" "It's okay, I kind of knew." "Dad. I'm sorry. I might get a divorce. Even though you were so happy about my marriage, I'm really sorry." I sobbed like a little child and told him everything. My father listened, nodding, and then he said, "Mandy, there's something I've never told you before." Actually, I was stunned by the shocking content of his words. When I returned home, Steve was waiting, looking furious. "Hey. You skipped housework to go to the hospital, didn't you?" "Yes." "Then it's a divorce. Hurry up and sign the divorce form." Steve forced me to sit at the dining table and to write the divorce form. I quietly asked him, "Are you really going to abandon me? Me, who is stressed out from taking care of my father?" "Yes, that's right. I don't care if the old man dies and you're left all alone. I'll gladly get rid of a defective wife like you." I silently signed the divorce form and left the house on that day. As I stood at the entrance with my belongings, Steve said dismissively, "Goodbye. Never show your face here again, damn wife." Soon after, I returned to my family home to continue caring for my father. However, 3 months later, my father passed away. After the funeral, when things had settled down a bit, a lawyer came to visit me. "I've come regarding your father's estate." I remembered what my father had said on the day of the surgery. "Mandy, I've been hiding this. But I've been trading stocks and cryptocurrencies for about 10 years. "What? Dad, why are you bringing this up now?" "With that, there's a substantial amount of money. When I pass away, it will all be yours. So don't worry about living after the divorce. Go ahead and leave him and live your life. Dad, all I want is for you to be happy. Please, don't make the wrong choice." Knowing this allowed me to decide to get a divorce. However, when I heard the amount of the inheritance from the lawyer, I was floored. Excluding taxes, I would have $3 million left. There were also several properties. My father, who had run a small stationery shop, had a talent for making money. I followed the lawyer's instructions and gratefully accepted the inheritance from my father. Later, when I had trouble with property management, I met my current husband, Ben. Born into a family of landlords, he easily solved my problems. Later, Ben proposed a relationship with marriage in mind, and I decided to remarry. Attracted by his competence and kind nature, I now have a happy life. I hope to continue living a peaceful life with the person I love. But just when I thought that, I ended up having a nightmare reunion at a real estate office I was visiting for business. I encountered my ex-husband, Steve. "Oh? Is that you, Mandy?" The moment I heard that voice, memories of my hellish married life surged back. And I turned around with goosebumps. Standing there was my smirking ex-husband, Steve, with a young woman clinging to his arm. Who would have thought we'd meet here? It's been a while, hasn't it? Huh? Steve's ex-wife? Nice to meet you. The young woman next to him greeted me in a high-pitched voice. My ex-husband had his arm around her. You see, this is my current wife, Kelly. Young and cute, huh? You are nothing compared to her. Faced with such an introduction by Steve, I informed him emotionlessly. I have some errands to run, so I will be leaving soon. Hey, is that your attitude after running into your ex-husband by chance? Can't you at least make small talk? As I remained silent, Steve looked me over from head to toe. You're all dressed up, but what are you doing at a real estate agency? You must be looking for some rundown apartment to live in alone, huh? That's none of your business. Then Kelly noticed the bag I was carrying. Huh? This person is carrying a super expensive bag? Steve, didn't you say your ex-wife is unemployed? Silly Kelly, it must be a fake. It's just a poor person's pretense. Is that so? Oh my, how shameful. Kelly laughed joyfully, and Steve smiled at her. Seeing in disgust their faces, he turned back to me and said disdainfully. What? Are you jealous? A poor, unemployed single woman at your age. You're living a miserable life because you couldn't serve me properly. Serves you right. Hey, Steve, that's too much. But well, it's true. I was furious inside. I had to say something. Turning back to them, I asked quietly. Hey, you, who exactly are you talking about? Huh? Just then, an executive from the real estate company approached me. Ms. Thompson, I apologize for the wait. I understand you wanted to discuss the matter regarding the condo you own. I responded politely to the executive. Yes, thank you for your assistance. But before we talk, may I have a moment? I ran into an acquaintance. Of course. I'll be waiting. Steve and Kelly watched the exchange between the executive and me with dumbfounded expressions. What? Owns a condo? He finally broke his silence, and I replied to him with a sigh. Yes. I currently own several properties. And I'm here today to discuss some contracts. Huh? Real estate? You? As he struggled to grasp the situation, I enlightened him. The father you ridiculed had made millions in stocks and owned several properties. I inherited all of that. What? You kept the inheritance a secret from me. You were the one who ridiculed and abandoned my father and me, right? Steve stammered and his face changed colors rapidly. Eventually, he began to beg. Mandy. I'm sorry about that time. I'll break up with her, so please marry me again. Huh? Wait a minute, Steve. Kelly looked at him with a shocked expression. As I looked down at him expressionlessly, Steve pleaded. Actually, my company is going under, and I'm in trouble with money. What? I didn't know about that. Shut up. You be quiet. Mandy, please, we were once married, right? Just as Steve was reaching out towards me, a stern voice rang out. Please do not touch my wife. What is this about? Who are you? There stood Ben, my current husband, who had arrived a bit late. He put his arm around my shoulder and glared at Steve. Tall and dressed in a well-tailored suit, Ben exuded an aura of wealth. Steve shrank back and muttered. Wife. Mandy, you remarried? Yes, I've been remarried for a while. To a man with better financial stability and character than you. No way, how can that be? Steve looked momentarily devastated, but then he started to say something outrageous. Then, Mandy, lend me some money. No, give me some. Just $10,000 would be fine, you're rich, right? To him, I shouted back. After the way you treated me, who would give you money? Don't ever show me that pathetic face again. Get out of here with that woman right now. Startled by my shouting, Steve realized he couldn't get any money from me. He then reached out to Kelly and spoke softly. Kelly, shall we go? Don't touch me. Kelly lashed out at the crestfallen Steve. I can't believe you kept quiet about your company going under. You were just after my father's money, weren't you? No, it's not like that. Believe me, I love you, Kelly. You just said you'd divorce me. Stop making a fool of me. Fine, I'll divorce you myself. Be prepared for that. I'll contact you through a lawyer. Kelly stormed off immediately after dropping those words. Apparently, she was from a well-off family. Left behind, Steve stood in stunned silence. At that moment, I couldn't resist whispering in his ear. Unemployed, poor, single man, serves you right. As Steve crumbled to his knees, Ben and I left the scene. I heard through the grapevine that Steve and Kelly did indeed divorce. Kelly's family owned a construction company. And her enraged parents threw Steve out penniless, who had been almost like a son-in-law. Later, Steve somehow managed to move into a rundown apartment. And now he spends his days laboring, alone and tirelessly. I will never forgive him. Even now, I don't feel the slightest bit of sympathy for him. Meanwhile, Ben and I continue to live a peaceful life. My father, who saved me from a desperate situation, and Ben, who taught me what true happiness is. I am forever grateful to them. Recently, I found out I'm pregnant. Ben is looking forward to the arrival of our child. I want to continue walking this happy path with my new family.